All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Got to put my glasses on here. Welcome um, to our work group meeting sponsored by the California Air Resources Board. Today's meeting will focus on the waste and wastewater fleets provisions of our proposed advanced clean fleets regulation. The goal of this regulatory effort is to accelerate the number of the number of medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle purchases to help achieve a full transition to zero emission vehicles in California as soon as possible. My name is Craig During. I am managing the efforts for the Advanced Clean Fleets Regulation. I am joined today by several of my colleagues, including board members Gideon Krakoff, Vice Chair Sandy Berg, who will also help facilitate this meeting. I'm also joined by our branch chief, Mr. Tony Brazil, lead staff, Paul Arnasia, and our presenter today, Harinder Figura. Before I begin, I want to let everybody know that this meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be made available on our website. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss options on how to better align state objectives to reduce in-state organic waste disposal while transitioning waste hauler and wastewater fleets to zero emissions. Today's meeting is scheduled to end by noon and is being presented in a hybrid format, meaning participants can attend in person or remotely via Zoom. And for those of us attending in person, let me just go over some evacuation procedures if necessary. In the event there is an alarm, please listen to the instructions first. And if we are required to evacuate the building, you'll need to go downstairs, exit the building at the front. And we do have a meeting place across the street adjacent to this building at Cesar Chavez Park. Materials for today's meeting, including a copy of our presentation and our draft regulation language, are available on our website. Our intention is to allow for full and open communication throughout the meeting and allow our stakeholders to ask questions, seek clarification, and provide comments specific to this part of the regulation. Because this is a hybrid meeting, I'm going to ask that participants attending in person ask your questions and provide comments by speaking into the microphone at the podium over here. Participants attending remotely will need to use your raise hand feature on your Zoom platform and use your microphone because the chat feature will not be available. When called upon, we will ask you to unmute your mic and state your comment or question. As a reminder, please introduce yourself by first stating your name and affiliation before making any comments. Due to the expected large number of participants, I would very much appreciate speakers if they could limit their comments to no more than 2 to 3 minutes, so everyone has an opportunity to speak. Let me remind everyone again that this meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be made available on our website. Okay, with that said, let me introduce board member Vice Chair Sandy Berg, who will provide some opening remarks before we walk through our presentation.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back in person. I think this is our first workshop back in person, and so appreciative of our colleagues that are attending virtually. I think this is really a great example about how CARB really hears stakeholders at the board meeting. And we're pleased to be here today to really find that balance, as Craig said, for the wastewater and the waste industry as we absolutely transition to zero emission. I'm so pleased that to be working on this project again with board member Krakoff, and appreciate he is going to take the lead and the leadership on this meeting on behalf of this group. And so I just wanted to say my good mornings and my welcome. Look forward to the discussion. We're really going to leave a lot of time for discussion to hear from you, but we need to hear solutions. It's not helpful to hear that this is just a problem. We understand it's a challenge. Let us know your ideas. So that will really be helpful to staff. And with that, thank you, Gideon, so much for chairing this and all the work you have done. You have carried the lion's share of the work between the two of us, and I really appreciate that. And so good morning.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and it's so nice to be here for, I think, our first in-person hybrid workshop, I think, in a few years at CARB. My name is Gideon Krakow. I'm Governor Newsom's appointee to CARB. I have a 20-year background in the solid waste industry. I think it's one of the reasons with this experience that the governor appointed me to this position. There's a lot of friends in the audience from the industry and I think online as well. I'm from the South Coast, AQMD, and I've been involved in the industry's fleet activities and compliance with CARB and AQMD rules, going back to diesel particulate traps, and then the first generation LNG and natural gas. Now in the South Coast, with our Fleet Rule 1193, nearly all of the solid waste collection vehicles are running on compressed natural gas. It probably is the cleanest large fleet in the world. Industry has been an early adopter, and there's a lot of pride in the fleets and the infrastructure investments. The solid waste and wastewater industries are now working on the challenges of organics recycling mandates, SB 1383, getting food and green waste out of the landfills, reducing methane emissions from our own waste. Hundreds of millions, if not billions of state dollars in programs like Cap and Trade, Greenhouse Gas Reductions Fund, and the Low Carbon Fuel Standard have been investing in technologies like anaerobic digestion and composting. Now, the waste and wastewater industries are looking at their contracts, their rates for consumers, and their procurement responsibilities with their local jurisdictions, CalRecycle, and the Public Utility Commission. And as industry does this, we regulators at CARB must ensure compliance with Governor Newsom's executive orders on zero emission fleets to be 100% zero emission by 2045 where feasible. And we're doing that and advancing that in our Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. We heard the ACF rule in our October board meeting, and the board directed staff to provide special consideration for waste and wastewater fleets before we set the rule for our final approval hearing in 2023. And that's why we're here today, to find the appropriate balance on how to achieve multiple objectives at the same time. We need to simultaneously reduce short-lived climate pollutants, reduce total greenhouse gas emissions, and reduce criteria pollutants to achieve public health. So we're here today to listen and to learn. Staff has a presentation. I think it was uploaded last week, as Craig noted. We're going to present that, and it's going to set the framework for our 3-hour workshop today. We also have reps from CalRecycle and the Public Utilities Commission that I believe are listening online. I want to thank them, all the CARB staff, Vice Chair Berg, Chair Randolph, Sid, Tony, Craig, Anne Marie, Paul Harinder, as well as the industrial division that does our climate planning and intergovernmental work. They're here today too. The idea is to get questions asked, ours and yours, and answered, to better understand the waste and wastewater industries and to have the foundation, the proper foundation for the board's upcoming final vote on the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. So this is our first in-person meeting in a while for a workshop. We're going to be patient, we're going to be professional, and we're going to be participatory. So thank you very much for being here. And with that, I'm going to return it over to Harinder Fagura, who is going to lead us in the presentation.
Thank you, Board Member Krakow. Hi, my name is Harinder Fagura, and today I will be giving a brief background on California emission goals and the board's direction on the proposed Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. Then I will be going over some thoughts on potential modifications. Then we'll open up for discussion. Okay. California has the worst air quality in the nation. Major reductions of NOx and PM 2.5 emissions are needed to achieve federal air quality attainment. This is especially challenging in the South Coast and San Joaquin valleys. Even as older, more pollutant trucks are removed from the fleet as required in the truck and bus regulation, additional emissions reductions are still needed. The California Air Resources Board has developed a suite of transportation-related planning documents to provide a roadmap in meeting all our emission reductions goals. The mobile source strategy, state implementation plan, and the scoping plan all show that we need zero emission everywhere possible, and to ensure that the lowest emission combustion technology and renewable fuels are used everywhere else. In September 2020, the governor signed an executive order N-79-20 that established targets for transportation sector to help put the state on a path to carbon neutrality by 2045. CARB staff has presented the Advanced Clean Fleets proposal to the board on October 27th, and were directed to allow flexibility for waste and wastewater fleets. And that is why we're here today. We'll have other meetings in the future to go over other proposed rule changes from the board's direction. CARB will release updated language for the regulation in spring of 2023 for a 15-day comment period, and then have a final board hearing, which is planned for spring of 2023. And now we'll cover a brief background on organic waste diversion. The Low Carbon Fuel Standard Program establishes a market and encourages biomethane as fuel in transportation. State policies establish statewide targets to divert organic waste away from landfills, and cities and counties must procure products created from the recovered organic waste. Some are producing biomethane from diverted organic waste through anaerobic digestion. SB 1440 requires gas utilities to purchase biomethane and provide an alternative market for biomethane use. The scoping plan shows substantial projected increase of biomethane as shown in the graph. Biomethane can be produced from existing treatment plants digesting sludge, digestion of diverted waste under the proposed scoping plan, and additional biomethane could be produced from the industrial food processing waste such as grease or fruit vegetable processing wastewater. Biomethane can be used in many different ways, and we expect it to change over the next 2 decades as we seek to ensure that we meet our multiple air quality and climate objectives. CARB scoping plan has identified these 4 potential uses for biomethane. Senate Bill 1440 also incentivize development of pipeline injection markets by requiring gas utilities to procure RNG, and as previously mentioned. Implementation of the policies to reduce short-lived climate pollutants has resulted in investments in infrastructure for receiving and processing diverted organic waste, but care needs to be taken to avoid stranding at existing assets. Some regulated parties plan on using existing capacity at wastewater treatment facilities to process increasing amounts of diverted organic waste. Markets need to be expanded for the products made from organic waste. Biomethane should be directed to hard to decarbonize sectors. Transportation is better suited for electrification, and the time is needed to shift the markets from biomethane away from transportation section to other sectors. For the next section, I'll be going over the proposed concepts for today's discussion. These are some principles that we think should guide the discussion. We have to figure out how to provide waste and wastewater fleets with some extra time to allow for a smooth transition for biomethane to be used in hard to decarbonize sectors where electrification is challenging. The approach needs to consider how to best achieve air quality and California's climate goals. We are sensitive to concerns in how to make these transitions while minimizing stranded assets, while continuing to make a full transition to zero emission fleets consistent with the governor's executive orders. Finally, any modifications to the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation must have an objective criteria for implementation and enforceability. This slide covers the fleets and vehicles that would include in the provision. These are based on stakeholder comments. These fleets would be eligible include fleets owned by or under contracts with municipalities, implementation organic waste diversion or receiving diverted organic waste for anaerobic digestion. Fleets owned by or contracted with facilities generating in-state biomethane for diverted organic waste. The vehicle types would include vehicles using in-state biomethane to collect and processing in-state organic waste, vehicles used to support wastewater and organic waste diversion facility processing in-state organic waste. These are the vehicle types that are proposed to be included as part of the discussion. Refuse compactors that operate on CNG are straightforward to identify. However, transfer and sludge trucks are difficult to identify because they are based on usage. We are interested in getting more information about them. CNG wastewater trucks would be those that are dedicated to wastewater divisions. We will need a way to identify the trucks that are exclusive to wastewater divisions. The proposed ACF regulation has different timeline based on truck bodies, and we believe that it is the best mechanism to use. Staff is proposing to place vehicles on the ZEV milestone option that begins in 2030. Recall, all the state and local government fleets would have the ability to use this option. Fleets would be able to continue to purchase CNG vehicles, but would eventually transition to a fully ZEV fleet by 2042. These vehicles would need to continue to use biomethane to remain eligible. This chart shows what percentage of fleet would be ZEVs with different examples. The blue dotted line shows purchase requirements for state and or local government fleet with a 15-year normal replacement plan. The black line shows how many ZEVs would be required for vehicles on Group 2 of the ZEV milestone schedule. The gray dash line shows how many ZEVs would be required with Group 3 schedule. This would be proposed timeline for the vehicles under waste and wastewater fleet provision. This shows an estimated inventory of solid waste collection compact vehicles. Staff estimate roughly 16,500 solid waste collection vehicles will operate in California in 2024. Out of nearly 8,000 refuse trucks in the South Coast Air Basin, about 75% of them are expected to have CNG engines in 2024. A smaller fraction is expected to have CNG vehicles in the San Joaquin Valley and the rest of the state. Staff currently estimates this provision will affect about 9,000 vehicles in CNG engines. This is a vast majority of these refuse compactors. We could use more information about transfer trucks and the trucks owned by wastewater agencies. Note that these population estimates assume the fraction of CNG powered trucks remain relative constant. If the provision encourages fuel switching from diesel to CNG, the numbers of effective vehicles could increase. And additional public meetings are planned. 15-day change package released from formal comments prior to the section board hearing. And then the second board hearing is in the spring of 2023. Now I'll hand it over to Board Member Krakow to lead discussion on some of the questions on how proposal could be crafted, including some details on how the rule will be implemented.
This last slide will stay up on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, if you want to.
Okay.
Just read over these questions and say, let's just open the discussion, or
Yeah.
leave it on the screen.
See, we're out of practice with these in-person workshops a little bit. I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do.
I got the question.
You've seen this proposal, everybody. We have these questions which we'll put up and keep up, but you've seen really slides 12 and 13 are sort of the meat and potatoes of the concept that we're talking about. So I'd like folks to sort of think about that. The idea would be, that we spend our time today, people can comment on it, but the idea would be, how do we make that workable? What are the things that CARB staff needs to, audit and ensure compliance with something like that. And then I think ultimately we're going to have to decide, which fleets are a part of that, which facilities are we talking about that are part of this 1383 ecosystem, and then what kind of vehicles, because there's different vehicles that service all this. So ultimately, we're going to have to figure those things out: which fleets, which facilities are we talking about, and which vehicles, and do it in a workable way. Just a couple, and so I think folks that need clarity on how to understand that have ideas. Our staff also can posit some questions. But let me just ask this. So the idea would be for the fleets that qualify, they would sort of have two different sets of responsibilities to comply with the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. One would be for the CNG, RNG vehicles that we're talking about today. And this would potentially get more flexibility and a different timeline. But then the regular part of the fleet that's running on diesel, that would be subject to the regular parts of the rule that everybody else complies with. Is that sort of the framework that we're starting with here? They would divide the fleets up, and one would be on one track and others on another potentially?
Yeah, so there's different pieces to it, because we are talking both about state and local government fleets that have a straight purchase requirement, and the commercial fleets that kind of have a couple of options. The one of the changes that we presented to the board is that we would open up the milestone compliance option to all the fleets, so that both state and local government fleets could take advantage of it if they so chose. And then in principle here, just kind of a little bit more background, kind of we didn't cover, is with the regulation structure, all fleets will have to report their vehicles. And then based on either the compliance option or the timeline that they're subject to, then you can determine what the compliance schedule would look like. So in principle, we anticipate that a lot of commercial fleets would likely use the ZEV milestone option. And if they are, then, and they have these CNG vehicles eligible for this provision, they would identify them. And then based on that, we would effectively treat them on the latest schedule in that ZEV milestone, where those particular trucks would be cleaned up starting in the 2030 timeframe. And if they weren't, yeah, and the vehicles that don't qualify for the provision would stay on the timeline depending on the body type. So if it's a box truck, it would be start in 2025. If it's a work truck, in most cases would be 2027. And then the latest vehicles or specialty ones would be in the 2030 timeframe. So that's the kind of the concept. However, for the public fleets, because we are talking about, many times it's cities that have different divisions and departments that each division could comply with a different option. And so a wastewater division could say, yes, we're going to use the ZEV milestone approach, but the rest of the city is going to stay with a straight purchase requirement because of it happens to align best with their purchase pattern. Then it's up to them to do that. So they would have that flexibility as well.
Yes. So I know that, well, go ahead.
And well, that's kind of one of the questions we kind of have out there. It's like, okay, how do you readily identify the vehicles from different divisions? We understand that there are usually the funding trail on how you fund the trucks is and which pots of money you pull from easily identify that, but we kind of need a little bit of help understanding how that separation is, so that if it comes to an audit at some point, that our enforcement team has something specific to identify. And then frankly, it would also make it much clearer to both the fleet owner and to ARB ultimately where that distinction is made, so that we minimize confusion and frankly can provide better assistance when we're trying to educate fleets on what their options are.
Does anybody else on the dais want to speak to that?
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to cover at the start. SB 1383 is a large bill that covers a lot of different things. We're really trying to focus on the organic waste diversion portion, so the waste and the wastewater portion. So just to kind of keep in mind what we're trying to look at today.
So we have 4 folks who have raised their hands online. So I would encourage anybody online that, oops, there we go, who wants to speak to raise their hand and we'll get to you. So we have listed these questions here. How do we identify wastewater trucks within the larger fleets of the cities and counties. What records would be appropriate for us to examine here at CARB to ensure that a fleet is, part of Cal Recycle's 1383 regulations? We have a little discussion on transfer trucks. There may be other kinds of trucks, pump trucks, roll-off trucks, the smaller bin delivery vehicles. And then other questions on a sunset and ways to ensure that folks know that ZE probably is coming here. So these investments that are made over the next 20 years, we don't want to strand those either. So anybody can come up either in the room or online and give us their thoughts. We want to have a back and forth. We also want to make sure that our staff at the end of the day, within a reasonable way that doesn't cause too much brain damage, can figure out how to ensure compliance with this. That makes sense. I mean, it's very important to the board and to the staff that we find a mechanism that makes this workable for us in a fair way. But again, I think it's going to focus on these three kinds of questions. Which fleets are we talking about? Which kinds of facilities within the 1383 ecosystem? You've got your digester facilities, there's compost facilities, biochar. How do we figure that out? And then, what kind of vehicles? We're talking about, for sure, most likely the collection vehicles. Aside front loaders, we've got an issue, I guess, with rear loaders. Then you've got your transfer trucks, pump trucks, the bin delivery vehicles, roll-off. So I think it's helpful for us to try to, in the end, figure out which fleets, which facilities, which vehicles. So maybe keep that in mind as you make your comments, as well as these questions here. But at the end of the day, this is a back and forth. But the staff, you folks have to implement this. So I think it's really important that you get the information also that you need. Obviously, we can have time after this meeting to do that, but let's try to make use of the meeting for that as well. Okay.
Thank you so much. Also, Board Member Krakow, we will do the in-person first, and then will staff be calling the people online to unmute them? And so you'll go ahead and, as a point of order, take care of that? Great. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll go ahead then with the folks in person. Mr. Edgar.
Thank you, Evan Edgar. I'm the engineer for the California Compost Coalition. I'm the RNG forever guy because we're carbon neutral now and we're carbon negative now. We're not looking at 2045. We've been doing this for years. So thank you for the focus on the advanced clean fleet rule today. I'll be back here on Thursday to have the same comments during the scoping plan because they're very tied together. The focus on hard to decarbonize industries should be focused on highest and best use because right now, RNG, we're having highest and best use. We're making it today and it's carbon negative. To have some type of hard to decarbonize industries, I think that's a tomato plant in Modesto or some cement kiln up in the upper desert, so far away from this PUC pipeline. And what you're going to hear today is that we're not on PUC pipeline. I represent the independent haulers with standalone anaerobic digestion. You're going to hear from wastewater about they don't have pipelines. You hear about SWANA landfills. They don't have pipelines. You heard this before. So for us to take what we're doing today and be carbon neutral today by using the biomethane on site, we use it for energy, be carbon neutral now, not 2045. Make carbon negative fuel now, and we use the heat to dry out biosolids, and you use the heat to dry out feedstock. So we're doing this today, and we're the harmonic fit for the circular economy, and we're being disrupted by the ZEV economy, which is not circular, it's linear. Years ago, about 25 years ago when I started, we were hard to decarbonize the solid waste industry. We were dirty diesel done dirt cheap with direct haul to a landfill. Okay, and we're off that. We're not doing dirty diesel. We cleaned it up. We're zero waste from landfills, and we're near zero NOx. So we're the early adopters from 20 years ago, and we're being penalized for being an early adopter because we're already far ahead away from the scoping plan. I was on an 06 scoping plan, and we took it seriously. You wanted the waste industry to be net zero by 2035, and we did it already. So I've been involved in various scoping plans. This scoping plan has taken a curveball. What we're doing is most cost effective. One of the rules under the scoping plan and advanced clean fleet, you want to be cost effective. That's a tenet of CARB. And and what you see with all the investments that the state makes in the anaerobic digestion is the most cost-effective program at $50 per ton of greenhouse gas reduced. This is from your report, not mine. This is a climate investment that you guys put out every year for cap and trade. ZEVs are 1,000 to 3,000 a ton to displace diesel on the ZEV program. We're 50. So we're most cost effective. So let's keep in mind that we are the most cost effective industry with on-site use as an essential public service. We can't have electricity disruption. We are the most cost effective as essential public service. So we really don't need to put a PUC pipeline. It takes 3 years and $3 million. That's not cost effective. To ship it away with losses to the tomato plant in Modesto, the high desert, we use it on site. It's an elegant solution. So what I have to say is that these questions is RNG forever. We use it on site. It's elegant. It's here and now. It's not a dream for tomorrow. So that's my comments. You hear that again on scoping plan on Thursday. Thank you very much.
So I think when you come back on Thursday, what is really important is there is a criteria pollution impact. And so what's the industry's thought on that? We have a NOx problem, and especially in the Central Valley and South Coast, there is a issue. These are residents that are affected. So it'd be great if the industry could take a look at and come up with either some mitigating ideas or something we need to handle that. And so net carbon zero is fabulous, but not at the cost of the pollution within the communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for your testimony.
And we're near zero NOx. That's what we do now. Thank you.
All right. Hi, I'm
Yes,
Sarah Delorier. I'm the Climate Change Program Manager with the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, and that group represents over 90% of the Seward population. You've heard that different workshops that have led up to this. And yes, we're very excited that there is some acknowledgement of the Senate Bill 1383 implementation and the work we went and did with the State Water Board, Resources Control Board, which hopefully is online as well, and putting that report together, the co-digestion capacity analysis. It was finished back in 2019 to show we can accept all the divertible food waste from landfills. So as such, we've mentioned, it can increase our biogas by 1,000 to 3,000%, depending on where you are or who you're talking about in terms of the agencies. So we're really interested in terms of how we utilize that biogas. And that's what we're talking about today in terms of possibly continuing the use of CNG, expanding that, because we're going to have such an increase as this implementation takes place. And also, of course, continuing our existing uses on site for our own resilience. But it was mentioned at that work group that we want to make sure that before we say not include the use of it as a transportation fuel, which we're seeing as a resilience option for us as we needed during the heat wave and as we need for our vehicles to be able to service distant populations as well as power takeoffs, that we think about what that future market could be and help develop that future market if it isn't within the zero emission. We do want to see it go from CNG to hydrogen. We want to help demonstrate that and work on that as far as research and determine what that makes sense for, again, continuing our own resilience and operations. As far as the facilities, we do see it as wastewater, but we are part of this one water picture where it's wastewater, water sanitation, and figuring out this ecosystem altogether. And so we see the use of our biogas to CNG also in the water sector as a whole and wastewater. And that maybe will be helpful in identifying the fleets in terms of contracts and such. We will be working with you in terms of figuring out how to best identify what fleets would make or what you need in order to identify those fleets, but also what types of vehicles you were talking about and identifying exactly which ones those are and what we need in terms of to support their resilience for operations for delivery of water and wastewater. We do have some ways of doing that, but again, we want to make sure that we're not overlooking the use and overall utilization of this renewable resource biogas, whether it's to CNG or to hydrogen or on use and other. We want to make sure that we still have a market as it's going to be increasing so much. I don't want to take too much more time, but because I know that there's some others that'll be speaking online as far as representing their individual agencies, but we're here to definitely work together and help and identify those pathways that you need for identifying fleets and types of vehicles.
And before you go, is there a way for the facilities to let us know who is connected to pipelines and who isn't? Because obviously the fleets that are not connected to pipelines, that is a major investment as we look at moving away from transportation. And it would be interesting from a percentage to understand throughout the state how each of these facilities are or are not connected. So just for
Yes.
future.
Yes, actually, that co-digestion capacity analysis was helpful in identifying how biogas is already being utilized and who is already connected or who is thinking of getting connected, but there's been some barriers with that connection or interconnection, whether it be, well, there's a number of them, cost, also the quality of the biogas and getting it to the quality that needs to be injected into the pipeline, as well as some other considerations like Cal OSHA, where we have some practical limitations there, where there's a limit of 10,000 pounds. Once you get up to 10,000 pounds of biogas, then you have to undergo some different measures that are too costly for many wastewater agencies at this point, but as also some just practical limitations that we need to consider to that. So there's interest, but there's those limitations. We can tell you which ones have implemented pipeline injection or who are nearby maybe pipelines that, but again, it's not a one size fits all. Not every one of them can actually do that or implement it.
So we understand that we're trying to get the landscape of,
Yes.
because it is going to be different and it's difficult because the regulation is one size fits all. And we've got to figure out how to balance that and
Yeah.
shoehorn different things. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
All right, thank you. Yes.
So I do appreciate you sort of keeping in mind this, what vehicles, what fleets, what facilities, questions that I've posed, because that's really where the rubber is going to hit the road here. I encourage all the commenters from industry and online to please try to address that in your comments. But I really would ask you and your members to get back to our staff. What exact kind of vehicles are we talking about that you want extra time on? In what fleets? Your own fleets, your contractors' fleets, and servicing what facilities? I understand that there's hundreds of wastewater facilities in the state. We're talking about all of those. We're talking about the slurry that goes in and the biosolids on the way out. I mean, we need hard answers to these questions to figure out how this rule can be crafted in a balanced way. And I really think that's the same question for everybody.
Definitely.
Okay, so you need to get back to us with specifics on that so our staff can understand. Does that make sense to staff, or do you have any further questions or anything else you might need from wastewater?
No, absolutely. I think the getting the data is what we need to help structure something that's going to work.
Okay, we'll work on an approach to get that data, at least the specifics that you all need.
And we need it by tomorrow.
I was just gonna ask that. I'm like, sure.
Well, and I'll
Yesterday.
actually expand that just for everybody listening. It's part of it too, is with the concept that we've kind of laid out. We're talking about a long-term transition. And so one of the discussions we've kind of already had is like, well, some of these contract fleets, for example, might only be a 1 or 2 year contract. That's not real practical to for the relationship to be changing every week, for us to have a regulation that's phased in over a 15 to 20 year period. So the franchise agreement kind of link is very straightforward, but other types of arrangements, it's, yeah, how long are these types of contracts, practically speaking? Do you have a mechanism that is going to vary year to year as to whether a fleet thinks they're in or not in provision? Then that becomes very difficult, both for them and for us ultimately to be able to implement. So
Okay.
keep that in mind.
Yeah, so if we can summarize relative to contract fleets, what that looks like in terms of timeline, so that we can see how we can manage that within the regulation. Okay.
Yeah, and not just for you, but for everybody. I mean, put yourself in the shoes of our staff. How are they going to audit and ensure compliance in a way that doesn't create, loads of unnecessary paperwork and is efficient? We want to have a regulation that we can implement in a reasonable way. So you've got to help us do that.
That's understood. Thank you.
And one thing I can add just in terms of this general timing. So we are trying to come back with 15-day changes early next year and a board hearing in spring of 2023. So in terms of when we actually need information by, like this month or January, those would be ideal, just so we can take the information, process it, and then put it into the actual 15-day changes. So getting information soon would be really helpful on our side to make sure that we can actually put these changes into our regulation text.
Yeah, that's appreciated as well in terms of how quickly you need to turn it around, because that's going to be a challenge to get the specific data for all of the vehicles across the state. We estimate between 1,500 to 2,000 vehicles across the different over 250 agencies that are at least above 1 MGD. We have quite a few more that are 1 MGD or below. So we'll figure out what we can do to get a best estimate for those things, as well as these contract details.
And for these things, the best information, I mean, we don't need perfect information, but just whatever you can get on hand, anything will be useful.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So much, sir. Hi, Alex. Good morning.
Hello, Alex Oseguera, Director of Government Affairs for Waste Management for California. So I will attempt to stay on the track of what type of vehicles, where they're at, and I'll begin with SB 1383. And I really want to highlight that it's a comprehensive program that touches everything that we do. It began January 1st, 2022. However, we've been planning it for years. Most of those franchises, in terms of the timelines, began January 1, 2022, or right now are being implemented through this year and next year. Those franchise agreements are not 1 or 2 years. We could never make the investments we make as an industry in 1 or 2 years. Those contracts are 10, 15, some of them as much as 20 years. But usually, as you look in terms of those franchise agreements, they're 10 to 15 years. In terms of what they touch and what type of vehicles they touch, this comprehensive program includes a gray container, a blue container, a green container, and potentially a brown container. One of them for MSW, one of them for commingled recycling, that includes some organic material there. Organics in green waste, that includes food waste, or even a separate brown container that includes food waste. And all of the vehicles and infrastructure to provide that. So I want to highlight that, because what we're looking for, Board Member Krakow, you asked, we want to make sure that we bring solutions. What we need is solutions, which is perfect.
I like all the problems. And she likes all the solutions.
Board Member Berg, it is that what we need is flexibility till we get to moving into the conversion to electrification. And that, we're as an organization at Waste Management, we're running pilot projects right now. And what are we doing with those pilot projects? Seeing how those vehicles work. Are they working, in real time? Do they work in elevation? Do they work, under heavy loads?
Alex, is Waste Management reliably running any zero emission solid waste collection vehicle in the state of California right now?
Reliably, no.
Thank you. When do you think? Can you estimate?
We moved, I'll probably give it to you in terms of a bit of a, maybe a story here, right? I was on conference calls about a year and a half ago regarding our electrification pilots. And every one of those calls was about why the vehicle was not working. So I joined those calls, to hear about this didn't work, so it's coming back to the yard. This is what we're working on to make sure it leaves next week. That has improved, to the pilots that we're running today, but they're still 20%, 30% less efficient. And so that's a very, very significant issue for us. And that's just under, pilot conditions. We're trying to make sure it's working. So right now, it's not there. In terms of, so anyway, that would be my answer to that. So I just want to make sure I highlight the comprehensive nature of SB 1383, because what I hear comments is that it goes down to what's a specific service you're providing for a specific commodity. And it's not that. It is comprehensive. It involves every commodity, every container, the facilities, the vehicles, and the energizing infrastructure for that. And then I did want to bring up one example that we're dealing with today, and especially in terms of infrastructure readiness. We're working currently on a $100 million project in Southern California, trying to get that going. Yes, Commissioner Brink.
We're going to be doing infrastructure at the first of the year in January. So I am going to have you save that. So
I'll save that one.
Stay very specific on the
vehicles.
vehicles and what we're doing specifically within the operations. Is that okay?
That's okay. I'll bring that one back.
Thank you.
But definitely have
Yeah.
concerns there.
Well, that's
um,
good. January,
January.
second week.
Right. So back to, I'll finish off, finalize my comments saying, the program is comprehensive. It involves many of the vehicles that we operate. So those include front loaders, rear loaders, automated side loaders, our transfer vehicles, our roll-offs. All of them are involved in implementing and moving in terms of successfully implementing SB 1383. Plus, all the rates that have been placed forward to all these California residents, with rates ranging from, depending on where you were, anywhere between 30 to 50% increase in rates. It's significant to individuals. And on top of that, we cannot come back and have a solution that is still not there, which would bring catastrophic increases to a lot of folks that I can tell you, if you go in front of some of these council members and boards to tell them that the rates are going up by $8, $10, $15, $20, it's already significant. To go back and say it's going to be more is going to be very, very difficult. Thank you.
Alex, I just want to clarify. I understand the comprehensiveness of the program, but specifically what trucks do you use the RNG, because
For waste management, it's for all of those.
all of those that you mentioned.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Alex,
Thanks.
could you estimate? I don't want to put you on the spot, and I should have asked you this beforehand so you could prepare. Can you estimate how many RNG or CNG trucks? Let me start over. Can you estimate how many CNG trucks you're running in all those different classifications in California right now?
I'll get the exact number wrong, 2,300 and something, 100% of them running on RNG. So we're the largest fleet in California running on RNG.
Thank you. Yep, that's helpful. Staff, in the presentation, and this I think is important for folks to understand and to clarify, on page 14, we have some bullet points here about the waste fleet timeline concept. And it says flexibility to continue purchasing CNG vehicles. What does that mean? The concept, at least.
Yeah, so with for simplicity's sake, if somebody only has vehicles that are in that group 3 timeline, what that means is by selecting that option, you're committing to meet the percentages specified, and it's up to you to figure out how to do that. And so we don't look at the vehicle age or miles like you have to in the other compliance options. So what that means is a fleet could make their own choice as to what their normal replacement patterns are and replacement cycles are, and continue to buy combustion vehicles, frankly, all the way up until 2030. But then with the 2030 timeline, would need to have the 10% of the vehicles being zero emission. And so when it comes down to that 2030 period, I think the fleet needs to be looking at the question of, does it make sense to keep buying combustion? If I'm keeping a vehicle another 12 years, I can still operate it till 2042 for a small percentage additional more. But at that time, it doesn't make sense to keep adding combustion vehicles because your timeline to get to zero becomes shorter and shorter. But that becomes, again, an individual business decision, because the way the rule is structured, it's just meet the percentages any way you want, and we don't care how your fleet effectively changes to do that.
So thank you for that. Again, these are just concepts. The next bullet point is another concept: must continue to use biomethane. So what's the concept there? And then how would that compliance be assured or enforced in the concept?
Yeah, so that's the part of the context behind providing more time is to help address kind of this overlapping issue onto using the biomethane now and then over time, potentially shifting it to other markets. And so in principle, if you're going to get extra time associated with this provision, in part to support the RNG market, that you would actually continue to use RNG in your fleets, which we would anticipate that everybody who takes advantage of it probably already is. But that's the idea, is if you're going to ultimately take advantage of the time associated with its use, that you would continue to use it. In principle, it would be simply a requirement that we would put in the regulation and an audit function at some point if a fleet were to not continue using RNG for whatever reason, then they would be in violation of it.
Thank you so much for explaining these proposals in I think, a straightforward and understandable way. I do think it's important for the industry to sort of understand what the concepts are as we move forward. So again, very much appreciate that. Appreciate, Alex, your sort of, focus on what kind of vehicles in which fleets servicing which facilities, and encourage everybody else to continue to focus on that. We next up, I think, have Sean Edgar. We're thinking of doing a workshop just for you, but instead we decided to let you speak, and you have 20 seconds.
Right. Thank you for that. I'm Sean Edgar. I'm the Director of Clean Fleets. I prepared some slides if staff could pull those up. While those are coming up, this portion of my presentation is really technical in nature to address the truck types issue. I will schedule that 3-hour session at the end of today, Board Member Krakoff, to talk about the other items. But just a kind of a picture speaks a
We'll
thousand
send other
words.
board members to sit on that one. Sandy.
Great. Appreciate it. Thank you, Vice Chair Berg. Next slide, please. So a picture speaks 1,000 words. And 22 years ago, when I started working on the diesel risk reduction plan, Mr. Brazil and I both had darker hair, and that's changed a little bit over the years. Just to flash back to the period between 2000 and 2003, the board at that time adopted the definition that's provided there that defines solid waste collection vehicle greater than 14,000 pounds used for the purpose of collecting residential commercial solid waste for a fee, and it included roll-off vehicles. And then it was changed in 2019 to slightly modify the terminology. So that terminology, just for staff's information, that standard terminology should probably flow over into whatever the waste provision in ACF works out. So the board calls those garbage packer trucks and garbage roll-off. And the board knows where those are because they've been reported into the trucker system, mostly throughout the state by waste industry. I'll just note before we leave this slide that and once again, this is technical, not editorial, but they're in trucker system. There's a category that's called roll-off that is not garbage roll-off specifically. And I'll come back to that in a future slide because once again, board staff should have a count of those vehicles.
So your point here is that if we're talking about solid waste collection vehicles as part of this proposal, we also should have in mind things that may not meet that technical definition, including roll-offs and other on-road vehicles.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the definitions provided there, once again, just to standardize terminology, so we're all speaking on the same sheet of music. Garbage packer is the types that staff noted on the truck types, and those are typically called rear loader, side loader, or automated side loader, or ASL, front loader, or FEL. So those are the 3 types that staff noted on their slide. What staff did not note, just as that regulation in 2003 did not include transfer trucks, which I have a couple pretty pictures to show you next of those. And also the roll-off, just as an observation, the concept that was put out does not currently include roll-offs or other on-road vehicles that are used either by franchised or authorized collectors or by other industries.
Your understanding is that some of those are running on RNG now?
Absolutely, and I have some pretty pictures to show you. Next slide, please. So this is a typical roll-off vehicle. This happens to be located at South San Francisco Scavenger Company. We know that these run on RNG today, and we know they collect organics. And as you can see, the upper left shows the tilt frame. So that's a roll-off vehicle, which the frame tilts to bring a debris box. And the word debris, so when we get into 1383 and talk about definitions, debris goes in those debris boxes, and we know that those debris boxes contain a significant amount of organics. In some cases, 100% organics are in the box, depending on who's moving the box. And I have some slides to share with you in a moment about that. And we know that these are running on RNG because you'll see the lower right picture. That's a nice little RNG diamond on there. So Blue Line Transfer, South San Francisco Scavenger makes their own fuel on site. They've significantly invested in that. And so that's a vehicle type that's running on 100% in-state RNG made by that particular fleet. Not to say that all fleets are right there making enough fuel to serve themselves, but in this example, this is a roll-off vehicle fueled by RNG today. Next slide. This is a support vehicle, which is not currently included in the concept, but the reason I mention it is we noticed all sizes of containers are put out. Mr. Oseguera mentioned about different colored carts, but also for commercial service. And you see restaurants and whatnot put out anywhere from a 1 cubic yard bin, which is standard, bigger than your 96-gallon cart that most of you roll out to the curb every week. And this particular fork truck has a fork on the back, and it picks up those more commercial style 1 yard up to 8 yard.
So it's like a
cubic yard
scout
containers.
truck when the bin is in a weird location that the collection vehicle can't get to, right?
Perfect. So scout truck is an example. Fork truck is another. Some folks would call this a stinger truck. So in the waste industry, it's called different things. We know it runs on RNG today because the lower right picture shows you the tank system, and these are running off of 100% RNG today in this particular fleet. The point being that these are capable, throughout the state, and the haulers commonly use this. Next slide. This is a support vehicle. This is called a container delivery, sometimes called a bin delivery, sometimes called a bulky waste truck, because it meets many different uses. That's a very common Ford F650 chassis, and that's a stake bed on the back, and it's got a lift gate. And those are used once again for everything from new cart delivery. Alex mentioned there's a system involved here, so we can't get the organics in a cart unless we deliver the cart to the customer. So this is a support vehicle that delivers the cart to the customer. And we know that this runs on natural gas today because on the lower right, the tank system that you can see there is integrated, and Ford F650 is one of the most common chassis sold as a support vehicle in the country. I'm not sure how many hundreds of thousands of those, but it's definitely available and is used today as a refuse support vehicle. Next slide.
Vehicles are bought as is from the OEMs, or for the most part, these vehicles are going to be retrofitted by special equipment aftermarket folks.
Excellent question. And I think you have some manufacturers in the audience to talk about how they integrate it. And I think the point is that after 25 years, and the last 22 I've been intimately involved, it's taken that period of time to get the manufacturing chain to where these vehicles can be produced that meet the customer's needs. And you at the end of the day, we're all the customer, but the refuse company after 25 years has figured out how to get these dialed in. And the manufacturing process, sometimes that's done on the line if it's a manufacturer, and I'm probably one or two of them that are here to speak about that. Sometimes it's done through the line. And sometimes because the refuse, so the tank system and fuel system may be put on at the factory, but refuse is typically, bodybuilders and upfitters are involved locally. So a chassis made elsewhere in the country would be shipped out to California, the body put on here. So it's kind of a mixed bag, Board Member Krakow.
But Sean, wouldn't that be a possible ideal type to go ZEV first?
Vice Chair Berg, I would say that due to the weight, Alex mentioned efficiencies and their experience with I think he said 20 to 30% lacking efficiency. So the challenge that I see, and once again, I'm sure we'll get more editorial later, and here we're here to uplift what the RNG field trucks can do today, not so much to, and board staff is dealing, I think, with the commercial availability and other things, but just to answer the question, this type of truck that's on the slide, on the screen now, in a ZEV configuration would be 4,000 to 6,000 to 7,000 pounds heavier than a conventional vehicle. And what that means is that's less carrying capacity. So when you have less carrying capacity, that means less weight can go in the box, which means more trucks on the road to serve the amount of waste organics that are being collected.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a ton of people online. Just a time check, we're 1 hour in. We have 2 hours left. So you'll roll through these slides. No pun intended.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Here's an example, West Coast Arborist. So this is a non-refuse. This is not a franchised hauler. This is a Southern California based. And if you see the blurb from their website, they serve, I think it says 330 municipalities in California and Arizona. And what this company does is 100% of what they haul are organics. And so they use the same type of truck on the left, a roll-off truck. They use a different colored bin. So you can see in the center bottom, they use a yellow colored bin for their use. And what the company does is they send guys like that up into trees, and they do line clearing and other public safety functions under contract to municipalities. The downward arrow from the man in the tree is they're using CARB permitted registered equipment to size reduce it, process it, put it in that yellow bin that's on the roll-off truck, and it'll go to a diversion facility like the one that's noted in the lower left. And we know that this material is 100% organic because it's tree trimming. And we know that 1383 requires it to be outside of the landfill burial because something else needs to be done with it over time. And we also know that everything in the box being organic, also wood and lumber, dimensional lumber, other things like that are hauled not just by West Coast arborists, but other folks, demolition contractors and others. So the same truck type carries organics to diversion facilities.
And this is going to be green waste.
This is going to be, yes, green waste, correct.
So that's not going to go to a digester.
Tree trimming. Well, it depends on the scope of the material. So they do, so landscape clearing. So some of this is wood chips. It depends on, once again, these are 1383 materials. And we know that 1383 markets are evolving. Some of this is composting markets and others can speak about the level of effort that it's going to take. I think Cal Recycle talked about doubling the amount of compost facilities. What I do know is the 100% organic material needs to stay out of the landfill. And right now it's going to diversion facilities and some of that may be suitable for AD. Some of it may go to other beneficial uses, but we know 1383 as a system has a home, and we need to find a home for the source separated
So you're
organics.
giving us this slide with the idea that there should be additional fleets and facilities that are covered by what we're talking about today, even if they don't have 1383 contracts with jurisdictions?
Yeah, well, in this case, I would say this is a municipal contractor for 300 plus cities.
So they might qualify.
They
current
might,
concept.
may or may not.
Okay,
That's why the devil's in details. But once again, this is a good example of headed to a
But
diversion
it's something we
facility.
should be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you. Next slide. Currently, a good question, Vice Chair Berg asked of whether they currently use RNG. This fleet, because the market signals from the board over the last 4 years have really been freezing because nobody who's a new entrant is going to be. Yep, no problem. And this is a transfer truck application. Yep. Not currently, but they have RNG fueling. The board staff knows there are 532 infrastructure points already built. They know that as part of the LER reporting. They also know if you look at the alternative fuel, they have 169 public access, so they
Okay,
can.
and these trucks that you were showing, are they diesel?
The last slide are diesel because that particular person is not. The next slide, which we can go back to, transfer trucks, these are RNG fueled in San Diego. So this is EDCO disposal.
And just explain to the layperson what a transfer truck is.
Sure. Transfer truck is essentially delivering, it's a fixed point delivery system from typically from a solid waste transfer station or recycling center to a facility. And that could be outbound to a compost facility, outbound to an AD facility, outbound to a landfill if it's municipal solid waste. So it could be multiple types, but typically these are return to base. As an example, the upper right, you see that the fueling post is there. So what EDCO's done, and that's another entity that's making its own renewable natural gas, they're fueling it because the vehicle is parked at a fixed facility every night and it has a relatively fixed route to a diversion facility, or if it's MSW, it's going to landfill.
So we're talking about CNG transfer trucks, correct?
Correct. These are 100% RNG fuel.
Okay. So I know we've got folks from CRNR, Waste Management, and Republic in the audience. Are you folks running CNG transfer trucks? Is that part of the fleet? Okay. Okay. Chuck, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. Yes. Okay. So it is part of the fleets here. Thank you.
Great. And next slide, please. So here are non-refuse day cab tractors, and I just put these pictures in to say that, once again, part of a system. So these are not, some of these may or may not be used in outside, the waste industry, but, non-refuse day cab tractors are readily available for a configuration such as a dump transfer for a demolition contractor. So there are many different aspects of non-refuse. And just to say, board staff could keep in mind, and when we'll talk a little bit more later about what fleets should qualify, but in the construction industry, for a dump tractor type trailer configuration or other uses in the construction industry, lowboy, heavy haul, other aspects of high mileage range that ZEV cannot qualify currently or meet that the daily mileage, then this is an example of non-refuse. And next slide. Here are other heavy haul vocational trucks, dump truck in the upper left, street sweeper in the upper right. Below is a ready mix truck. That particular company has spent $45 million on CNG, on RNG projects. I don't know that their program was designed to phase out in the next couple of years. So we need to think about having some consideration for folks that have heavily invested. And next slide.
But those folks may or may not be involved in the 1383 ecosystem.
They may or may not be involved in the 1383 ecosystem.
What's your
but-
argument as to why we should be including them if they're not engaged in the 1383 ecosystem?
Yeah, volume and short-lived climate pollutants, because the board staff told us that the underpinnings of this regulation are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The best near-term way to do that is through use of renewable natural gas and to get off of diesel.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
I understand the argument. Okay,
Great,
thank you.
and my contact information there, and I'll come up later and perhaps talk a little bit more after others. Thank you.
Okay, so just give us a 10-second housekeeping pause here.
So they don't.
All right, we're going to do one more comment from the inside the building here. After this, we will switch to the Zoom platform, and we'll take about 20 minutes of comments on the Zoom platform, and then we'll come back in person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same order.
We'll come back in the same order.
Just hold on one second. The four of you that are standing, can you stick around or do you have to go? If you have to go, we'll take you. You sure, Nick? Bill?
I only want like 1/10 of an acre.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, I'm Suzanne Sivright Sutherland from California Construction and Industrial Materials Association. We represent the aggregate, asphalt, industrial minerals, and ready-mix concrete industry. We appreciate the opportunity to continue this discussion from the ACF rule. In reference to ready-mix trucks, a vocational specialty weight-sensitive application, these trucks align with all of the guiding principles of the proposed provision we're discussing today. Without a regulatory requirement, ready-mix concrete trucks have proactively invested in CNG and RNG equipment and infrastructure that supports the SB 1383 goal. However, we do not have 1383 contracts. We don't haul waste, we haul concrete. This still supports the diversion of organic waste. Our natural gas fleets use RNG in all opportunities it is available. We take pride in telling our communities about this, and it also supports other environmental initiatives that our industry pursues. Specifically, the Air Resources Board assessments do not expect viable zero emissions vehicle technology in specialty and weight sensitive applications, accounting for 2% of the trucks on the road until after 2030. CARB considers a subset of these vehicles, which includes ready-mix trucks, among the least likely as ZEV may become available. So in lieu of the ACF regulation only permitting continued use of diesel for this subset, we ask CARB to consider inclusion of these ready-mix concrete trucks within the proposed fleet provision. It promotes the use of natural gas to grow organic recycling capacity.
Yeah, we're aware of the investments that the industry has made in CNG for the ready-mix trucks, for example. But just explain to me, what's the relationship with 1380? You're not hauling 1383 materials. You're not working with 1383 materials. You're fueling with 1383 materials, right? Is that the difference?
No, we align with like the guiding principles for why the Air Resources Board is creating this provision, but we are not 1383 contractors. Thank you.
Staff, do you have any perspective on that? And on again, we're considering this discussion of which fleets, which facilities. How is staff looking at somebody like the ready-mix folks?
Yeah, so my understanding for the ready-mix trucks is that they all would essentially already be in that group 3 category. And so they would already be in the schedule of the 10% would need to be zero emission by the 2030 timeframe. But I'm also aware, as I think Suzanne highlighted, is that what we have is in the regulation 2 is a provision that if the vehicle simply doesn't exist to purchase as a zero emission, you can continue buying combustion. The ready-mix trucks are obviously or basically already on that list. We've seen some examples in Europe, but if by 2030 they're still not available, they can continue to be purchased as combustion vehicles. So whether they're CNG or diesel would continue to be allowed.
So we wouldn't be thinking of that sector with necessarily what we're talking about today,
Correct.
but potentially it could be handled by other provisions of the rule.
That's correct. And yeah, and even when I'm saying that it would start in 2030, that's if they're available, but that would be the first 10%. It would still be phased in over a long period. So it's not an overnight change.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to go to online and maybe jump back and forth, respecting the folks that are here today as well. Someone's going to call the online folks. And
Yeah.
Again,
yeah.
try to keep the comments to, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, absolute maximum. 1/2 of an Edgar.
Absolutely. Thanks. And let me, and let me remind the participants that are making comments to state your name and affiliation before you make your comments. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, I have 13 attendees with their hands raised. The first one is David Rothbart. Dave Rothbart, you may speak.
Good morning. This is David Rothbard. I represent the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts, and I'm also the Air Quality Committee Chair for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. And we represent public agencies that are really important for the 1383 discussion. Essentially, I want to kind of answer these questions, but I kind of need to redirect the discussion a little bit. The dilemma that my agency and the people I represent are having is we're a critical element in SB 1383 being successful. When 1383 is implemented, food waste comes out of landfills to reduce methane emissions to the atmosphere. That food waste needs to go somewhere. Because of the Clean Air Act and a lot of things I'm not going to get into, it's pretty much going to go to digestion. So our wastewater treatment plants have the ability to take all the food waste, digest it, and turn it into this non-fossil fuel that can be utilized. The question is, where do you utilize it? We're open to using it anywhere. We're a public entity. We're serving the public. The problem is, because of the Clean Air Act, as Board Member Krakoff understands, that we have issues in many air districts for attainment. So you can't combust this. We're going to increase this potential generation of ozone forming gases by 1,000, 3,000% of additional biomethane. We can't be burning that. We need to put it somewhere else rather than a stationary source. It needs to go somewhere else. We're open to putting a pipeline, but there are problems with the pipeline as far as Cal OSHA, the quantity, the distance away from pipelines. I have one of the biggest wastewater treatment plants in Southern California, and we can't find a way to put it all into the pipeline. So we have this roadblock. Everywhere we go, we have roadblocks. Hence the ask was, can we continue putting it into vehicles until there's another solution like hydrogen? So that's something we're open to, but even hydrogen is not commercially available for digester gas to be turned into hydrogen. We're happy to work with you on it, but we need that home. So the bottom line is we start asking these questions of which trucks need to be utilized. I could say from my own agency, I don't have enough trucks. I'm going to be generating so much gas. I need to be fueling other vehicles like the solid waste trucks. I already have a RNG fueling station, but I won't have enough trucks in my facility to utilize it. As a public agency, I would recommend that people be allowed to put in a fueling station, and any vehicles that can use it should use it for the intent of all the gas needs a home. Slide 14, in my mind, it's very appreciated, all the discussion of finding solutions, but having a deadline saying you can no longer use this gas in vehicles by 2042, that's great as long as we have a home for it. Once there's hydrogen, there's a way to put it in the pipeline, we have a way to manage all this gas, then maybe that works. But to me, it's premature to say that by that date, we'll have an ability to use it elsewhere. It makes sense to me. I deal with South Coast more than I'd like to admit. As far as reducing NOx, dealing with pollution, what we're saying is as far as any new vehicles purchased would have to comply with omnibus. That's a very strict standard that will clean up trucks very quickly. We're open to getting electric vehicles, but don't miss the point that I'm trying to make as far as we need a home for the biogas moving forward. By limiting the number of fleets, the number of trucks that can utilize this, we're not addressing the underlying problem of the gas needs somewhere to go permanently. especially if 1383 is going to be successful. So I have to go on and on and on. I just wanted to stop there. I'm trying to answer the questions here, but I think it's a bigger issue, and we're happy to continue talking to CARB staff about this. We did already. I really appreciate those discussions we've had with Tony and everybody else. We're here to help, but I think we need to broaden this to make sure we fix the problem and get to clean air as quickly as possible and achieve 1383's goals. So I'll stop there if there's any questions for me. I really appreciate the workshop. It's very helpful. And again, we want to continue working with you. Thank you.
I don't know if anybody from CARB's industrial services sector is here to sort of talk about what our scoping plan says about the interaction of our rules along with Cal Recycle's requirements, with the PUC's issues with, I think it's AB 1440, a pipeline injection. We are cognizant of that. We're proud of doing with this workshop, having attendees from all these agencies. I don't know if anybody, I thought Rajinder might. Okay. Yeah, so Matt, we're at CARB aware of what Cal Recycle and PUC are looking at. We're aware of how this interacts with our scoping plan. Our fleet group is aware of this too. And again, these are the kind of things that we're thinking about. I don't expect, Mr. Rothbart, this to be the last discussion among the agencies and among CARB about how all these things are integrated. At the end of the day, whether that means that anybody can drive up to your facilities and fuel with RNG and forget about the advanced clean fleet rule, I'm not sure that's the direction we're going to be going. But maybe Mr. Botil can speak to some of these larger issues about how our agency is thinking about the scoping plan, thinking about 1383 and organics.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Matt Botil. I'm the division chief of the Industrial Strategies Division. Sorry, I can't be there in person today. I'm just dealing with a sick one at home. So Board Member Krakoff is broadly right here. When we were developing the scoping plan and working on our pathway to carbon neutrality, we looked at, well, what are some of the potential end uses for RNG outside of not just the transportation sector, and how do we really decarbonize some of these harder to decarbonize sectors like the industrial sector? And what we did is identify pathways for RNG into hydrogen and into non-transportation end uses. And we also identified the really significant ramp up in RNG supplies that will come from 1383 implementation. So as a climate strategy, we are expecting the supply of RNG to grow and for the demand of it to grow into other sectors beyond just the transportation sector. I think we recognize that there is a need to deal with some of the barriers like pipeline interconnection, permitting for facilities, and also cost recovery needed to be able to move that gas into other sectors. So we've called that out in the scoping plan. We've been working really closely with the PUC as they roll out SB 1440 to look at how that biomethane procurement for utilities can help support the broader climate strategy as well. So definitely recognize the challenges and the need for more work here in terms of other end uses for RNG and opportunities for policy development in that area going forward.
Yeah, very helpful. And we're having regular discussions with PUC and Cal Recycle about this, and the back and forth there helped inform the scoping plan, right, Mr. Botil?
That's right. Yeah, the PUC was closely involved here, and we wanted to make sure that in our estimates of what the biomethane availability would be going forward, we were taking into account what would be needed to hit our 1383 targets and support the 1440 work that was happening at the PUC.
Yeah, and there's a lot of uncertainty, which I think is why we're here today. The next caller.
Greg Kester, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for holding this workshop and for the board direction to the staff at the after the workshop on the 27th of October. Just a couple of quick points in terms of the vehicles. I guess what I haven't heard are long haul trucks that may transport our biosolids out to agricultural land as a type of vehicle that we would think should be included. And I fully support all of David's comments that he just made. We also have Vector trucks and emergency vehicles that are needed for our essential public services at the wastewater plants. And I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Greg Kester, the Director of Renewable Resource Programs for the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. As Sarah mentioned, we represent most of the wastewater sector in the state. And a question that I have, and David alluded to this as well, is the time limitation. We're going to be producing biogas as long as we have wastewater treatment. Over 90% of the wastewater flow in the state is treated at plants who utilize anaerobic digestion. So we are already producing biogas from our sludge digestion, and that is going to exponentially increase as SB 1383 is implemented, if it is successful, through co-digestion. And so that begs the question as to, what if zero emission vehicles are not available commercially and cost effectively by 2042 or sometime before that? We don't see it on the horizon necessarily yet, but we're always going to have our biogas. We're always going to need to utilize it. The last thing we want to do is flare it after producing it. And it's important to note that, with SB 1383, the wastewater sector, as David and Sarah alluded to, can help us meet those objectives through co-digestion, but we have to assure that that is cost effective and that we have a use for the biogas. There is no requirement in SB 1383 that we accept it, but we certainly think that that is what is in the interest of the state and in our interest to mitigate climate change. But certainly we need to have that ability to utilize the biogas. To that end as well, the low carbon fuel standard has been underutilized thus far because, so far we have been digesting our sludge that we produce, and for the most part, utilizing that biogas on site for our own heat and power needs. As David mentioned, that's getting harder and harder, and certainly some air districts, the South Coast in particular, the San Joaquin Valley as well, the Bay Area as well. And so we do need alternative uses, and we're going to be producing more and more biogas if we are doing co-digestion, and therefore we're going to need a suite of options. The low carbon fuel standard, as I say, is something that we expect will be much more heavily utilized moving forward. We will be commenting on their proposed revisions as well, and be pushing for their alternative 3, which allows the continued use of our biomethane as a low carbon transportation fuel. In answer to Board Member Berg's question of who is doing pipeline injection at this point, I think I can answer that with 3 wastewater plants that I am aware of: San Diego at Point Loma, Victor Valley Regional Wastewater Authority in Victorville, and Regional San in Sacramento are currently the only 3 that I'm aware of that are doing it as public agencies. We expect that will increase with SB 1440, but as has been mentioned, that is a limited option for us, not only because of Cal OSHA requirements, but also because of cost and proximity to the pipeline. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and really look forward to continuing this dialogue and appreciate the workshop.
So hi, this is Vice Chair Berg. So I just have a pretty please request. Given our time, we are now an hour and a half. We do understand the issues for the industry. And so trust me when I say you don't need to tell us. We get it. So we do need to keep moving along in order to make sure that we can accommodate all of the comments. So if we can stick to our comments specifically to what we're addressing today, as well as solutions, but you don't need to let us know. We get the organic problem. We get that we're going to have a lot of fuel. We get that we have to have some place to put it. We understand it 100%. What we're trying to get down to is how to balance once again. And thank you, Greg, for that additional information on the pipeline. And LCFS is really important, and we'll have some more workshops on that as well. So thank you.
Next on Zoom to speak is Colleen Garcia. Colleen, I've unmuted your mic and you may speak. Colleen, I think the mic is still muted on your side. Oh, okay. I guess I'm going to skip down to Julia Levin. Julia, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Good morning. This is Julia Levin with the Bioenergy Association of California. I really want to thank the board members and staff for holding this workshop and considering how to help essentially connect the dots, the circular economy, as Evan Edgar said, between waste haulers and biomethane production. I have a couple of responses to the questions. The first is to recognize that SB 1383 is not just about methane reductions. Actually, the larger requirement of SB 1383 is black carbon reductions. And so while we strongly support an exemption or an extension for waste and wastewater trucks, as well as any other essential and emergency vehicles, there's a hugely important area under SB 1383, which is forest fuel removal. Those are also very heavy duty trucks, and there is not a ZEV option right now. But in the 2022 scoping plan, the Air Board is proposing increasing forest fuel treatments on almost 2.5 million acres a year. We need very low emission trucks that can run on biomethane to transport that waste, because otherwise it will be diesel trucks. And that will really undermine our progress in reducing black carbon emissions. So we really urge the Air Board to add trucks that are hauling forest waste and probably ag waste as well, basically any organic waste, not just the organic waste that has to be diverted from landfills. We also encourage the Air Board to use estimates of in-state biomethane potential from the 2017 IPER, the Energy Commission's Integrated Energy Policy Report. I don't know why, but the estimate on slide 7 in the staff presentation was an extreme underestimate of in-state biomethane potential. And I think a big part of the reason is it didn't include biomethane from forest waste, agricultural waste, or even urban wood waste, which is a very large fraction of the organic waste going to landfills. We have to think beyond anaerobic digestion and compost. Those are two extremely valuable tools, but that's not really going to get at most of the woody waste going to landfills or a lot of the ag waste and forest waste. So please revisit the amount of in-state biomethane that will be available. The 2017 IPER did a very extensive review of it. The Lawrence Livermore National Lab on Carbon Neutrality did an extensive review, and the numbers on slide 7 are just orders of magnitude too low. And that brings me to my last request, well, two last requests. The first is, I don't think the presentation was clear that near zero emission trucks need to run on in-state biomethane, but I think that that should be a requirement going forward, again, to help connect the dots and create a circular economy where organic waste is being used to fuel these trucks. So I think that should be an explicit requirement, and it didn't appear to be in the presentation. And then last but not least, we strongly support using biomethane in hard to electrify end uses, but the state has got to get a procurement program focused on hard to electrify end uses up and running and really ready to go, which generally takes several years. It took several years after the RPS was adopted, after the LCFS was adopted. It'll take a few more years really to get SB 1440 working. But SB 1440 is not focused on hard to electrify end uses. It's focused on residential and small businesses, which is what the Air Board wants to electrify. So we do need a long-term home for in-state biomethane, and that really doesn't exist now beyond very limited uses for LCFS, biomass, and SB 1440. So thank you for listening to all this. And again, we strongly support the direction the Air Board is moving with waste and wastewater, but urge you to include other forms of organic waste haulers as well.
Thank you, Julia. Tony, could you just take a minute to remind the audience again about the fact that we do have exemptions, along with my understanding of the map of that we did have very northern areas left out of the original regulation, because we know those areas are going to be very challenged because they're very remote. And so it would be helpful if we could connect as stakeholders to understand where staff has already dealt within the regulation of exemptions, understanding if there aren't vehicles, that we have a process to that. If it is in a remote area, that we do understand this is all not going to be electrified overnight. This is going to take decades. And so if you could just review that one more time, Tony, please.
Okay. Yes, so for just kind of reminder of background, the regulation already includes language for the state and local government fleets that are in the, lack of a better term, more rural areas of the state would have effectively an exemption to not have to make zero emission purchases until starting 2027. One of the things we did present to the board was to actually even provide more time for smaller public agencies as well in a provision yet to be, the detail to be worked out. And then as built into the regulation are provisions that do address if vehicles aren't available as a zero emission, but if they are and they don't meet a particular fleet's application or duty cycle needs, then there's a mechanism to allow for the continued purchase of combustion vehicles until a ZEV, such as ZEV, does become available. That is more of a case-by-case basis for the fleet. So we've tried to address a number of those things within the structure of the regulation. And since one of the Vector trucks came up, and the regulation specifically also excludes vehicles that have two engines to do part of their work. So some Vectors would fit that category. And then I think the Vector truck itself would highly likely be, especially a Class 8, would likely be in that Group 3 schedule as well. So also having more time because of the suitability for electrification expected to take a little longer in those categories.
And I don't want to put Mr. Botil on the spot again here. And if, but I will. And if he signed off, we'll deal with it another time. But in the scoping plan with the forest and the ag waste, what does the scoping plan say about how we're gonna handle that? And do you have any observations, Matt, on how this fits into the discussion we're having today and some of the concerns raised by Julia Levin?
Yeah, happy to respond to it, and no problem putting me on the spot. So once again, Matt Botil, Division Chief of ISDs. So Julia raises some important points with respect to what we're asking for in the scoping plan, which is we have a significant need for fuels reduction and forest health related actions to help reduce our wildfire risk and our emissions from wildfires. And so in the scoping plan, we worked with CNRA and our other agency partners to look at what should the ramp up be in fuels reduction and forest health treatments between now and 2045. And we are calling for a pretty significant increase in forest health treatments to help reduce that wildfire risk. And with that, there will be the need for transporting that forest biomass. The same is true in the ag biomass space. But the need to potentially utilize a portion of that agricultural and forest biomass for beneficial energy and non-energy uses. And so this kind of goes back to that biomethane estimates that Julia had put forward. We predicted that we would be able to utilize that residue for hydrogen production via gasification and potentially even pair it with CCS. And doing so meets a couple of our really key carbon neutrality and air quality objectives. One, it provides the opportunity for hydrogen to be used in hard to decarbonize sectors or in the transportation sector to move us away from fossil fuels. And two, if it's paired with CCS, it gives us the opportunity to provide carbon dioxide removal that we need to get to carbon neutrality as well. So we are expecting an increase in biomethane, and we are expecting a utilization of forest and ag biomass, but we think there's alternatives that we could deploy between now and 2045 that align better with our climate, air quality goals that we have for the state.
That's very helpful. I mean, there's still, I think, and we're going to see the scoping plan in a couple of days, and obviously there still remains a lot of uncertainty about how all these things are going to play out. We're going to try to deal with what we can in the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule in the next few months. But one of the things that I'm really encouraged by is, we're now having a discussion about, the waste and wastewater industry and the organics and how it relates to CARB's work. We're having it here today. We're having it in the scoping plan. We've got our partners at PUC and Cal Recycle listening online. And I'm confident that this is not the last time we're going to be discussing this. And we're going to need to continue to discuss it over the next few years, over the next decade, to see how this goes, how the technology goes, what changes in LCFS are made, how the PUC's SB 1440 stuff rolls out, how our ACF rule rolls out. But I think we're setting the framework and a signal that we want to have those discussions at CARB, and we're willing to have those discussions at CARB, and that we need to continue these discussions at CARB. We'll take our next caller.
Mike Tunnel, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate Board Member Berg and Krakow attending the workshop. And, I just would like to add that many of our members, they're not 1383 fleets, but they have participating in the renewable natural gas supply chain by purchasing CNG vehicles. They have done some of this through incentives. The state has helped with these purchases, directed the purchase of renewable natural gas. So I think, just would ask you to consider those vehicles as you do this. And I think Tony has on slide 14 shown that it fits in with what the private fleet rule is proposing. But most of these vehicles are day cabs or smaller. So they're on even this time frame that he has proposed doesn't apply. So I would just say, look, I'm looking for equity on natural gas on this, and as you move through this, I think we're an audience. These fleets, I get the question over and over. What about natural gas?
Mike, where are you coming from? What fleets or what kind of businesses?
Anything from truckload to national carriers. So trucking freight haulers who have purchased renewable natural gas trucks. So that I realize it's a little beyond the scope of what you're asking here or discussing today, but I think it warrants the question of how do you deal with natural gas, renewable natural gas fleet?
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And Mike, your affiliation was with the American Trucking Association.
Oh,
Is that correct?
I am so sorry. Yeah, I jumped right in. Mike Tunnel, American Trucking Association. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Okay, thanks so much.
Got it. Sorry about that.
Just a reminder to state your affiliation after your mic is unmuted. So next to speak is Mohammed Patel. Mohammed, you may speak.
Hi, folks. Excuse me. My name is Mohammed Patel. That's Muhammed. And I'm a member of the Environmental Justice Advocacy Coalition, advocating for a stronger. I just want to make a couple of points and then ask a couple of questions for staff to consider as they continue developing this provision. To begin, and I appreciate the Vice Board's comment on this, in that biomethane is often shown to have a very change impact, but from a tank to wheel perspective, limited tailpipe emissions virtually equal to fossil natural gas. So emissions are still.
Mohammed, we're having trouble hearing you.
Apologies. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Please let me know if that continues and I can hear you.
Oh, it's cutting back out again.
Okay.
Your mic.
I will cede my time then to someone else. Apologies.
No problem. Next in line to speak is Steve Jepson. Steve, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak. Oh, he's gone. Okay. Next in line to speak is Todd Campbell. You may, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
After Todd, let's go back to the people in the room, please.
Okay.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you. I sometimes have problems with my mic. Good morning, Todd Campbell with Clean Energy. And I want to thank both Vice Chair Berg and Board Member Krakoff for attending today's workshop. I think that's really great of you guys to spend more of your time. I know you countlessly spend your time on many issues. Thank you. I also like to thank staff for holding this workshop today. I guess my first question is, I'm trying to figure out why we're attempting to specifically move biogas out of the transportation space when there are a number of reasons to keep it in. I mean, one, we know it works and delivers carbon neutrality now. Second, we don't have any real idea as to how many or how the advanced clean fleet rule will fare once it's implemented. There's a lot of questions surrounding the availability of trucks, charging infrastructure, and power deployment. So, it just seems pretty premature to think about this at this point. Three, we know biogas can play a huge role to support hydrogen and battery platforms. So there is a future for this fuel in this space. And four, we may need biogas to support other truck and bus sectors if our ambitions run into a hiccup in implementation. It's happened before. I mean, we've seen rules being rolled back before because, we had hoped that the technology would be ready and that we would be able to implement it in a certain way. But sometimes that doesn't always end up being the case. And so I guess, I would just urge caution from that perspective. Second, we are very concerned about this conversation of shifting biogas to hard to decarbonize sectors when we have not been given any idea of what staff means by this. I think we have to be very careful about what we say right now if California wants private capital to continue to invest in biomethane capture. And I would caution you to move very carefully on this issue if you do not want to chill investments that are capturing methane, a short-lived climate pollutant that we must relentlessly pursue to prevent climate change. Additionally, we've had subsequent meetings with CARB's LCFS staff on the LCFS, and we've been told that the desire of the agency is to capture more methane here in California, as such an action would help us meet our SB 1383 goals. So I think we need to do a lot more work on how you keep this industry investing the billions of dollars required to grow it, because pages 8 and 9 are really not helpful to a producer like myself. They create uncertainty and anxiety. And if you want to broaden the markets and demonstrate how those potential markets are properly incentivized, that should be your focus, or at least CARB's focus, before we even contemplate phasing out the use of biogas in transportation. And I'm not convinced, it should for many of the reasons above. And I especially don't if the rule gets rolled back and the default essentially is diesel. My third point is I want to repeat our asks that CARB require fleets, not just the waste fleets, to purchase the cleanest option available if an internal combustion engine is purchased. And I think a lot of us would agree that a 2027 omnibus compliant engine at 0.02 grams NOx made available in 2024 would be ideal, as it would cut the very NOx emissions in diesel particulate matter that Vice Chair Berg referenced earlier today as a concern to communities. That option won't happen, in my opinion, if the board and staff do not require it specifically in the rule. This is an action I believe is an easy ask that could prevent dirtier diesel purchases and can save lives. But if you don't ask for it, there will be no reason for Cummins to manufacture it in 2024. And I think that's what we're trying to say. If you want something that's cleaner, within almost a year from now, we have to ask for it. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. And then finally, I just had a clarification question from Vice Chair Berg. Earlier, you mentioned or you wanted to challenge the industry in terms of mitigation measures from the waste industry, specifically to NOx in the communities. And I was hoping that you could elaborate a little bit more so that we can be helpful and get those responses back to you, because I'm not really sure what the problem is, and we want to address it. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Todd. We'll do some more thinking about that. I do want to encourage Mohammed just either to try to call back, or if not, if he can get back with staff. And specifically, I'd be happy to have a phone call with him. I want to make sure that we are hearing the EJ perspective. And I apologize that our connections wasn't very good today. And for anybody else who feels that they can't call in, thank you.
Yeah, so at this point in time, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Got 9 folks still online. So just hold there. And we've got 4 or 5 folks here in the audience. And we got an hour and 15 minutes left. So I'm hopeful that we can still get to everyone. Staff, again, if you're not getting questions answered, if we're not meeting the goals that staff has for this workshop, please pipe in as well. So that being said, we're going to start here back in the room with Bill McGavran.
Good morning. Bill McGavran with Coalition for Clean Air. I've been advocating for reducing emissions of methane and other short-lived climate pollutants ever since supporting AB 32 back in 2006, and also been working for many years on the transition to zero-emission trucks. And I think when we talk about this sector, there's a particular imperative to reducing emissions because refuse trucks are in our neighborhoods all the time. So they're emitting, right where we live and breathe. And so trying to meet those various objectives, I think that the concept that you've outlined this morning makes a lot of sense. And I think in addressing what exactly should be covered, I think the facilities and the vehicles need to be part of that circular economy of diverting organics away from landfills and treating wastewater. And I think within those parameters that this proposal is very much in keeping with what board members directed in October and would really help to advance both our climate and clean air standards. We know that the waste sector does generate a significant amount of methane, and that's why that is exactly the sector that needs to be covered by this. Something that I didn't see in your outline, which I think is also crucial, is that any new trucks purchased would have to meet the heavy-duty omnibus standard. You may think that that's just assumed, but I don't see any reason why they couldn't go out of state and buy a new truck that didn't meet the standard and try to bring that in. So we have to make sure that they meet California's tightest standard for emissions from combustion trucks. So with that, I think that this is something that we would like to see go to the boards when Advanced Clean Fleets comes back, and we will strongly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Tony, you have any thought on this interaction with Omnibus?
Yes, no. So Bill, I mean, I think as you identified, we didn't specify anything here simply because a new engine purchase would meet the omnibus standard when this rule is in effect. But I think as you highlighted, somebody, yes, could still possibly go out of state. And so we'll take that back and factor that in.
And then we have Nick Lapis from Californians Against Waste. Welcome, Nick. Good to see you.
Good morning, Nick Lapis with Environmental Group Californians Against Waste. Largely wanted to echo Bill's comments. He said a lot of what I wanted to say. I did want to add on a couple points. First of all, wanted to appreciate the staff's attempt to sort of thread the needle here and find a compromise that isn't a compromise for the sake of saying we split the baby, but really does accomplish multiple policy goals, specifically when it comes to limiting the types of RNG that are allowed. I think that is a great way to help facilitate that compromise of really supporting the 1383 infrastructure that we need without necessarily opening up a huge loophole for landfill gas, dairies, et cetera. And, we're in the first year of implementing SB 1383. And I think the success of that program is far from certain. We have a lot of work to do to make sure it's successful. And this really helps bridge that divide without foreclosing on our electric vehicle goals that we have as a state. So thank you to the board members and to the staff for your work on this.
Thank you for being here, Nick, and really appreciate all your advocacy and your great knowledge of the 1383 ecosystem. Again, I don't want to put you on the spot and probably should have asked you to prepare for this question, but you probably, and if you don't know the answer, you can get back to us as well. But I want to ask a question about green waste, food waste, and composting. We heard Alex talk about all these different bins. In LA, for example, we have the green bin, which is the green waste. And maybe eventually we're going to have a separate bin just for organics that would be separate from our black bin trash. To comply with 1383, we're going to have to increasingly divert and recycle the green waste, which is tree trimmings, grass, stuff like that, as well as the food waste. These are two different kinds of things, often have to be treated differently. I think the green waste makes better compost. The food waste is a little harder, perhaps, to compost. Is better to go in these digesters. And I think the digesters also can handle the food waste better than they can handle the green waste. So I guess the question I have is, looking towards the future, as we're trying to comply with the really aggressive mandates of 1383, when you look at the green and the food waste, how much of that can be composted? How much of that needs to go to digesters and the wastewater plants? Is one all the answer? Is the other all the answer? Or do you think that it's going to be a portfolio of all these different things that are going to help us get to 1383? That's sort of the question. We're having a big discussion here about digesters, which create the gas that we have to put back in the trucks. I want to make sure that we think that that's going to continue to be part of the solution. I think Mr. Botil is telling us it is. A lot of the stakeholders are saying that it is. But how do you think the state moving forward is going to tackle the problems with green and food waste?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I almost feel like I fed that to you, actually, but it really is all of the above. There's absolutely no way around it. And the way we've always done solid waste in California comes down to local control and finding local solutions for the problems. And we have composters in Northern California that have been taking food scraps and green waste for decades successfully. We have some of the new anaerobic digestion companies that are taking green waste and food scraps, exact same feedstock successfully. And the only way we implement this massive program at a cost-effective scale is if we allow companies to find what works for them. So at least for our organization, we are strong supporters of both composting and anaerobic digestion. And I actually think it's not quite as clear-cut as food waste versus green waste, because there are definitely some dry digesters that take a lot of green waste. And there are a lot of composters who take a lot of food waste. And like I said, we need all of the above. Thank you.
Interesting. If other folks have observations on that topic, that'd be helpful too. So that's interesting to us. And again, this question of which fleets, which facilities, and which kind of equipment, keep that in mind too as we go to the public comments. Just a time check, we've got about an hour and 15 minutes left.
Hi, good morning. Veronica Pardo, Resource Recovery Coalition of California, representing haulers, composters, and recyclers throughout the state. We're in strong support of the recommendation put forward today by staff, both the fleet scope that was addressed and if we could actually go back to the timeline, if that's possible. I believe it's slide 14 or 12. 14, please. Thank you. So I point out, so we were part of a larger coalition, submitted comments, the effect asking for these vehicles to be moved to a later timeline, and we're seeing staff has the same recommendations, and we support this. There was an additional component to our request asking that in the 50% timeframe, that we drop that 50% target to have the time to do exactly what has been discussed today as we discuss the biomethane procurement and the targets. Gideon, you just spoke to this concern about what percentage and what tons. We can simply look to the SB 1440, 8 million tons, and those procurement targets that have been set to say the state is moving towards an understanding that this material will create biomethane indefinitely. In the wastewater sector, this is simply not going away. We're going to see an increase in biogas and biomethane production. So without a plan, without a strategy, without this transition, we are left questioning, how are we going to produce, how are we going to make these facilities work and operate? So I'm in strong support. We're in strong support of the recommendations today. We do request that additional time frame of the 50% that be dropped so that we have the 2036 to 2039 timeframe to really work towards what you are describing today, getting this material either into the pipeline, getting it into hydrogen production, or if we put our finger on the scale and say, we want to produce this, make electricity with this, there's a reason why these investments have been made, and they've made this transition. We've been told that this is carbon negative, that we are getting the emission reductions, and we've been working with our local cities and counties to get these benefits. It is not the time to say that this is no longer valuable and that we no longer support this effort. All of these avenues are necessary for us to get the 20 million tons, 40 million tons. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions of tons of organic waste that, when left in the landfill, is creating a highly potent greenhouse gas that is a short-lived climate pollutant that we must address today. So we're very grateful. And then I would also just point out, as you're looking at these definitions, we already know, and we've talked about with staff, that there are conditions. In many cases, our vehicles are extremely heavy duty and they have heavy front axles, and we need to be able to carry this weight. And so in many cases, we're actually going to fall under the specialty vehicle category. And so this really needs to be acknowledged that this sector has already made the transition, has made these investments, is doing the good work today. I'm just repeating other comments at this point, and so I don't want to take your time. So I strongly support the comments of the other hauler representatives today. And I just thank staff. It's taken us 2.5 years to get here, to get this concept, but we're finally opening the door to say, again, and then the only other comment I say, the scope and applicability, 1.5 million heavy duty trucks on the road. And we're talking about 9,000 trucks that are already getting these negative emissions. I think we really need to address that scope and applicability. We're talking about a fraction of a fraction that is already getting these reductions. And I acknowledge, especially if we move to 2040, if you say all zero emission, but 2040, I mean, it's inevitable, right? We're getting to a point where we wouldn't even be able to fuel trucks because those trucks may be past their useful life. There may be no trucks even available. All refuse trucks may be hydrogen fueled and ZEV in the future. But today, we can't get trucks. We have guys that have been purchased trucks. We're waiting 2.5 years for delivery of these trucks. Our infrastructure, we'll get to the infrastructure later, Vice Chair Berg. But suffice it to say, our sector are good faith actors. They are making the effort. And we're here today, and we're grateful for this opportunity because I think you are all seeing that now. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Veronica. Good morning, Chuck.
Good morning. Chuck Elgott, representing Republic Services. And again, I want to thank staff and board members for the work that you've done carving this out. This hasn't been easy, and it will not be easy going forward because it's all going to be in the details, and we got a lot of details to work out. Republic Service is supportive of the direction this is going, very supportive. I think it's a manner of carving out a reasonable compromise. We run about 2,500, so I can provide at least a little data for you, 2,500 CNG trucks running on RNG in California. We have 5 electric vehicle collection vehicles operating in Boise today and operating effectively on selective routes, recycling routes typically. We'll be bringing 3 ZEV trucks.
Recycling routes, it's a little bit lighter, is that?
More predictable. They're not running on residential routes that I'm aware of today because of the heavy loads. So, selectively using them as best we can. We'll be bringing 3 trucks into Anaheim to service Santa Ana in Q2, probably this year, and adding more throughout the year.
Can I ask you, who's the manufacturer of those trucks? Do you know?
I will get back to you on that. I think it's a mix. There are a couple of we're trying different manufacturers right now to try to figure it out, but I'll get that to you. So the details. SB 1383, Alex did an extraordinarily good job of outlining the complexities of 1383. We're going to have to sort our way through that. It's not just food waste and green waste. And 1383 defines organics very broadly, so cardboard would be considered an organic under 1383. So we wanted to go through this workshop to hear all the valid discussion. We'll be getting back to you with more details. You've asked some very concise questions. We'll do our best to give you some very concise answers. We'll be reaching out to staff to sit down and talk to them about our fleets and what we're doing. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. And I know that
one other quick thing, the delicate topic, the in-state, out-of-state biomethane issue. Understand the concerns and supportive of those, but it's also going to be, I think, the key limiting factor, the effectiveness of this because of the availability short-term of in-state biomethane. So I understand, and Tony, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, 2024 is the cutoff for in-state or for out-of-state use of out-of-state biomethane. It's sort of unclear in the, was there a date certain that out-of-state biomethane would not be counted anymore?
No, we at this point, it's a draft, and so there's nothing like that per se. I think we were trying to do is say, here's the criteria what the fleets are in, the ones that are supporting the implementation. So it's really associated with that more so than saying you can't use any out-of-state or in-state fuel per se, but the intent is to support the in-state market, yes.
And I understand that we may want to consider, you may want to consider some sort of a phase in for that gives us a little bit of time to adapt. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. If we could flip to slide 19. Yes, thank you. My name is Mark de Smit from Autocar Trucks. Refuse trucks is my livelihood. That's what I do. And CNG trucks is a very large portion of that. So I'm going to try and answer your questions today. You have one there specifically on transfer trucks. And I would agree with you, a transfer truck is nothing else than a Class 8 tractor, right? That's all it is. So definitely there, it's a use case, not a class. We don't build anything special for a truck. Plug-in hybrids and CNGs. I'm going to answer your question with a little bit of a question from my side. There's two things which I think we need to just comment on the plug-in hybrid. The first one is, what is the business case for a business to actually develop a plug-in hybrid at the moment? You're investing into something which we know is going to die by 2040, 2035, depending on when we have to be 100% zero emissions vehicle. So why put money into something that is going to die? It just doesn't make business sense. And the second thing to think about on that is, remember us as OEMs, we're still bound by advanced clean trucks. So we have to get to the zero emissions vehicles. So putting money into zero emissions vehicles makes more sense than into hybrids at this stage. So do you sunset it? I'm sure there are. In fact, I do know there are some OEs, not OEs, but companies developing the plug-in hybrids for the CNGs. Is it going to go mainstream? I highly doubt it because OEMs know it's going to die. So those are my two comments on that. Thank you very much.
Hi, Mikhail Scavarla here on behalf of the city of Roseville. Not a large city, so medium-sized city. So to that question, I think it's fairly easy for us to identify the vehicles associated with our refuse and wastewater fleets. They don't do other operations within the city. You're not going to see a truck from the wastewater facility out there doing road work. It's just, so we can easily identify that if necessary within compliance. That said, throughout the course of today, I think I question the notion that medium and heavy duty transportation is not hard to decarbonize. I think it is a very difficult space to decarbonize. And while there are offerings that are being talked about, it's not here immediately today. And there's a sunk investment based around 1383 compliance. 1383, which most of the people in this room were not around in the hallways of the legislature that night, almost did not make it across until the biomethane and dairy folks came on board. So the fact that we're here, the fact that these folks are making these massive investments to mitigate methane were due to their, agreement that night. That bill was not going to make it. And there were promises made. Most of those promises were not kept. The investments have not been commensurate with the goal. And while there have been some investments, it's not at the scale. So again, the rates have been increased. I think most of us, at least in Northern California, have received that 30% increase. And so the steel is in the ground. More vehicles have been ordered. And so I think limiting it on what, vehicles you have in use today may not, doesn't meet kind of the scale up of the facility as it's just come online. I know we're going to talk about infrastructure next month, but these two things are not disconnected. Takes time to build in California. When things come online, that's when things happen. So, as Kaza mentioned, the RNG to hydrogen transition, once you have a hydrogen plant, you will transition your fleet because there will be no more RNG. It's all been converted, right? Like those things go hand in hand. So a phase in doesn't necessarily make a great deal of sense as much as, can you get the infrastructure in the ground? Once the infrastructure is in the ground, then you can convert the fleet. So thank you.
Thank you. And I know the city of Roseville's been really engaged in this process the whole way through. So one of the reasons why we're here today, right? Three more, for those online, we have three more in-person commenters, and then we'll go to you folks online and finish up.
Good morning. I'm John McNamara with CRNR. I think you guys know who we are. Thank you, Board Member Krakoff and Berg, for hosting this. Really appreciate it. And also the staff, Tony, Paul, and Craig and your staff are putting together a lot of work. I know you've worked on it a lot, and we really appreciate the response you guys have had to our comments in the past. And I'll just cut to the chase. We support this alternative path, and we support front loaders, side loaders, rear loaders, transfer trucks. I heard a comment saying it'd be difficult to identify transfer trucks, but it's not. We register those with the state, and we have 20 CNG, RNG trucks right now. We've been operating those for about 2 years. So I don't think that's difficult. I think those should be included. And then I'll acknowledge my colleague, Sean Edgar. I think the roll-off trucks, I hadn't thought about it actually till he presented the Arbor folks. Those are folks that do a really big job with us. They're usually working with us, with our cities, to take care of all that material, all the trees and whatnot. So I think those might be something you should consider too. In our earlier comments, written comments this year, we suggested what was made a comment earlier, that just eliminate that 2036 50%. That would be really helpful for us in that proposal that you have in the slides. That's about it, unless you have any comments or questions for me. Oh, by the way, we've also invested $100 million over the last 5 years in an anaerobic digester, the pipeline, the treatment system, the testing system, the trucks, the fueling infrastructure, and other infrastructure to put into place our system, which is an anaerobic digester in Southern California. We treat the organic waste. We make RNG. We run about 500 trucks on RNG every day. And those are all part of a system. That $100 million is including our own private investment, as well as the state, about $15 from California Resources Board, CEC, South Coast AQMD, Cal Recycle, and others that they put towards that investment. So we really appreciate, this has been a great workshop. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk and support what you guys
How many
are.
tons a day of organics are you rolling through those digesters?
To the digesters, it depends on the time of year. It's more during the summer, less during the winter time, but about 300 to 400 tons per day.
And that's going to be food waste and green waste, or what's the feedstock?
Mostly green waste. So it's
Green
mostly residential, commercial, landscapers. Yeah, and that's how it was designed. I think I've forgotten if you've been to there or not. I can't remember, but it was designed as it's okay. Well, you can come down. You're invited to come down. It's kind of a hybrid, so it's like a plug flow digester, but it was modified. So mostly it's meant for the yard waste, because you've heard the comments earlier, the testimony earlier. That's the big portion of the 20 million tons a year that we got to divert from landfills. So that's what it was designed for specifically. And we started that process. That system's been operating for the last 5 years. We've operated continuously with no issues for 5 years, connected to the pipeline. We're the first private company in the state of California to ever do that. I always like to make that comment. But it's been 5 years, no issues. And before that, though, we took 5 years to plan it, get the funding, and work with the state to achieve the goals of the state and serve our customers. We have about 50 cities that we contract with to help them comply with these requirements. And now that 1383 is being implemented, that's what it's there for. So that's a tool for them and us and you, actually, the state. So
thank you.
All right.
We have two more in person, and then we'll go to online.
Hi, good morning. John Costantino on behalf of SEEB. First question is for staff. First of all, really enjoy being here. Maybe I'm a policy dork, but in person is always better. So thank you for doing this. What is the accommodation for public fleets? The slide that was just up, slide 14, 15 is the high priority fleets. But if you're a municipality yourself, are you required to buy these vehicles in 24, 27? What does your math look like? What if you're a small city and you have 100% mandate in 3 years?
It's a lot of questions. So
It's all the same question though.
My understanding is that we, as part of the board direction, considered the proposal of allowing the public fleets to opt into the ZEV milestones from the private fleets. And I guess the idea here was that even within the public fleets, certain divisions could opt in. Is that the idea, Tony?
That's correct. So if you have a city with multiple divisions, one of them being a wastewater division that qualifies for this provision, the wastewater division itself could use the ZEV milestone as a compliance option.
Sure.
Even if the rest of the city chose to stay with the standard.
But what
purchase
if
requirement.
the wastewater division wanted to stick with the public fleets rule?
But well, that would be the choice that they're making. If they stay with the public fleet rule, then they're basically determining their purchase cycle is.
So then in
extended.
2027, they have 100% mandate, even if they're using RNG in the waste sector.
Correct. But that would be, again, the purchases they make according to their schedule would be zero emission. The ones that they want to keep for the next 30, 40 years or however long they want to keep them, they would actually be able to keep them as long as they like.
Okay. All right. You guys have asked several people to give you comments today. Are those official comments? Are you asking for comments? Can other people submit comments? I look at Molly over there in the back and she's probably shuddering, but.
So let me try to answer that. So right now we're looking for just additional information. I would call it informally email staff, the ZEV fleet email address would be a good address to send us the information so that we have enough details. Because one of our plans is to take the information, finalize the concept, including the minutia. And then when we intend to have, one, we have to go through a 15-day process with any changes we make. And so we obviously need the details for that, but we're also looking to do a workshop before we were even going to do that. And so the sooner we can craft it, the sooner we can get comments on the details, because the devil is in the details.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the point is, before those 15-day changes are drafted, get your information to staff. Staff try to get your questions answered. That will go into a 15-day proposal. Folks will have their formal ability to comment on that, and then that goes to the board. Hi, Doug. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Doug Kobold. I am the chair of the Solid Waste Association of North America, California Chapters Legislative Task Force. We affectionately call ourselves the LTF and SWANA LTF. And so I'll be making my comments on behalf of the LTF. You did receive comments from the LTF back in February, along with a coalition of members that were working on that. So you've got some of those. I'm not going to repeat what has been said. I think we've got more things to do, but I did want to touch on a few things I didn't hear. And so a couple of those are cities and counties up and down the state under 1383 procurement are required to meet certain goals, and that has actually been escalated in a tiered fashion with the new law that was just passed here in this last the second year of this session. And so one of those procurement targets is RNG. And there have been a lot of cities and counties that have now renewed their franchise agreements or initiated franchise agreements that include RNG as a part of that procurement to help them meet their targets. And so now if we remove RNG, depending on how long those contracts are, and you heard that they could be 15, 20 years, that could be a significant issue moving forward if they have to be changed out early on. Another thing I wanted to talk about was just that we're pushing for hydrogen fuel as well. It's either going to be ZEV or hydrogen fuel. The trucks that are being produced today, and I was doing some research recently on what a hydrogen vehicle looks like, how it's powered, et cetera, versus how a standard RNG, CNG type truck is powered. They're very similar. So trucks that can typically last 300 to 500,000 miles, may not be able to last that long on their batteries. We all know the batteries don't last that long. They're going to have to be changed out. Now, if we can convert to hydrogen later on and still you run those trucks, why doesn't that make sense? It'd be a pretty easy conversion compared to selling that, getting rid of that truck, selling it out of state so that you can get a electric vehicle. Also, attended WasteCon last week on these crutches. It was real fun down in San Diego. And the CEO of SWANA interviewed the CEO of Battle Motors. Battle Motors is producing refuse trucks. They're producing electric refuse trucks. And there's two trucks. And there was two comments that I took among many of them that I took very seriously. One was that they are only going to be able to produce about 1,200 vehicles per year. We're creating a bubble for ourselves. You've heard how many collection vehicles have to be changed out, 16,500 vehicles according to your own numbers. And so right there, if that company was the only one that was producing trucks only in California, it would still take 10 to 12 years to change out all those trucks. So, but there's America. We're not just California. And so there are going to be other demands on that company. There will be other trucking companies making these things, but are we even going to be able to meet it? And the second thing I found very interesting is David Biederman, the CEO of SWANA, asked the Battle Motors CEO, will we be able to meet the electrification requirements, 100% electrification requirements for the fleet of solid waste vehicles by 2050? He said no. That's a clear indicator that the industry itself is questioning whether or not we can get there. And this is targeting us at 2042, 8 years earlier. And he's stating we can't get there in 2050, 8 years later. So that's going to be a pretty significant issue. Another one I didn't hear was about the RINs and LCF credits. Right now, a lot of fleets are dependent upon those credits for their CNG, RNG vehicles. And if we go to electrification, that goes away. Now, those RINs and LCF credits get passed through on the franchises to cost or to save money to the curbside. And you've heard we've increased the rates 30%. I've heard from some of my city representatives as much as 50%. So there are significant rate increases already. You start to remove those credits as well. Now we're going to have to look at more increases. The ZEV, you've heard already that the ZEV vehicles are going to cost more. They run less efficiently. There's all these other issues that are all going to drive up costs. And it was pure turmoil to get for some jurisdictions to get 1383 rate increases. So this would just add another, what we were kind of talking about is 1383 part 2 as far as rate increases. And so that's going to be a significant thing to think about. And then finally, a question I've been looking for an answer for and have not found. When we talk about taking the RNG gas, we stick it in a pipe and we send it to some commercial user and they use it for their process. How different are the emissions coming out of that end user than if we stick it into the collection truck, utilizing the circular economy, which you've heard, where those emissions are controlled as well? Is it any different? So are we really helping things by sticking in a pipe and shipping it somewhere else, potentially out of state, especially when the dairies are producing a lot of RNG as well? So there's just one more thing to think about. Are we really solving a problem by forcing it into a pipe and sending it somewhere else if we can use it within the collection trucks themselves? And I will, because of time, I will cease my comments there.
Thank you. Those are some really interesting observations for sure. Thanks, Doug. Okay, we're going to go back to the folks online, starting with the inimitable Chuck White.
Oh, actually, we were going to call on a couple folks that didn't get a chance to speak last time. Mohammed, we're going to unmute your mic so you can try and speak again.
Thank you. Let's hope this time works better. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Mohammed Patel. I'm with the Clean Air Coalition. At the CARB board hearing 2 months ago, I provided some testimony about my own experiences with asthma and ending up in the ER because of bad air quality. I just want to talk a little bit about NOx in regards to this provision. The vice chair mentioned earlier that NOx is still an issue with these vehicles. And many folks have mentioned, wanting to honor investments that have been made. I just want to highlight that, sacrifices have been made by communities across California in terms of their health, in terms of their well-being, due to smog and air pollution. And if the point of the ACF rule is to accelerate us towards ZEVs, this provision will delay that. And while I appreciate the technical nature of the conversation occurring here and the need to find a middle ground, I just want to highlight that short term, the the NOx pollution will continue, and they will continue to affect the air we breathe. Finally, I just have one question, for staff as they continue to work on this provision. On the moving these fleets to Group 3, specifically, I think this goes to the question about worrying about stranded assets. And the question is, why move these fleets to Group 3 rather than Group 2? Does that delay, to me, that delay stands out as a time that more investment can be made in this technology, which will then result, by the time 2030 comes around, in more stranded assets than if these vehicles were in Group 2 maybe. So would be interested to hear about the justification on moving to Group 3 and how you all feel that might impact this question around stranded assets.
And thank you, Mohammed. I know to Tony that this issue of stranded assets, both in the short run and the long run, is something you're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're trying to do when structuring the provision, and we're open to suggestions on how to address it. But yeah, so with this proposal, we would be providing more time. And so one of the things we are looking to guard against and trying to look at, do we leave it to the fleets to make their own decisions, or do we put something in to minimize a situation where somebody might put in a bunch of infrastructure, knowing that they will eventually transition to zero emission on the shorthand? And then how do you minimize the potential for that to happen? I mean, obviously we anticipate approaching that with an educational aspect to it, but do we need to build anything in to the regulation to minimize that potential? In terms of vehicle life, remember that underlying with the any of the options in the regulation, fleets are under the model year approach, they're able to keep their vehicles the minimum 18 years before the rule would actually require that to be replaced under that option. So it isn't affecting vehicles that are newer than that. The flexibility and the milestone approach allows the fleets to then make their choices on how to do that, or which vehicles to keep longer, which ones they don't need to keep as long as part of their option. But yeah, any thoughts on how to do that would be great. In terms of the Group 2 versus 3, the Group 1 vehicles are predominantly box trucks and vans that are already widely available as EVs and are generally not being used in the wastewater industry and the waste fleets. So by allowing the extra time associated with the Group 3 timeframe, makes sense to stretch out that time period and still gets us to that 100% endpoint of the 2042.
Great. So just a time check. We've got about, I'd say about 40 more minutes. We're going to close the queue at this point in time with the, I think, 14 attendees, please, moderator, so that we can get to everybody. But to be clear, in order to take advantage of the flexibility that we're talking about today, Tony, folks are going to have to opt in for this, at least this percentage of the fleet, this portion of the fleet, to the ZEV milestone pathway, correct?
Yeah, I mean, let's make sure we don't talk around each other. So for a commercial fleet, I anticipate it will be the whole fleet is either using this option or not. I mean, and the model year approach is everything you buy starting in 2024 is zero emission. Doesn't provide a lot of flexibility per se. And then when the truck does reach the end of its useful life, you do have to remove it from your fleet. The milestone approach, as you know, is staggered based on the body type, and then allows the fleet more flexibility in which trucks they keep and which ones they don't. So we do anticipate many would do that. If their company is big enough where it has multiple subsidiaries and so on, each of them would comply separately and can pick whichever choice would make the most sense for them.
Yeah, so it's going to be important for folks to understand how the rule is going to work for their fleets. Okay, again, we have about 40 minutes, about 13 to 15 callers. So I'll ask folks to focus on these questions at hand: which facilities, which fleets, which equipment. We know the background, and so folks can try to get through their comments so everyone can participate. Thank you.
All right, next in line to speak is Steve Jepson. Please, I've unmuted your mic and you may speak.
Hi, thank you. My name is Steve Jepson. I'm the Executive Director for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. We represent 80 public water and wastewater facilities in Southern California. So the considerations in the Advanced Complete Rule for the wastewater sector need to be broad, not narrow, and I'll tell you why. redundancy and resiliency. Our sector has to convey and treat wastewater 24/7 at all times of the day, every day of the week. With no disrespect to our solid waste folks, they provide an excellent service and I support their requests. We can't delay wastewater pickup for a holiday day. We can't delay it for an hour. We can't delay it for more than minutes. That is why redundancy and resiliency is so important. So when our management and elected board officials for public facilities are looking at choices in capital, we're looking at redundancy and resiliency. So and to take on a food waste diversion project into our existing digester capacity, if there aren't multiple pathways, multiple reliable pathways for that gas, it's not going to pass the redundancy and resiliency test. So only pipeline injection, we've talked about expensive or a pipeline nearby can take, isn't going to be a solution. A narrow advanced clean fleet exemption for a few vehicles isn't going to be a broad enough solution for investing in allocating digester capacity for food waste diversion. So this is really important. It's important that with the advanced clean fleet rule, CARB sends a clear signal to the wastewater sector that yes, we value your biogas production, we value your needs for redundancy and resiliency, and want to have broad options for that gas use. Also, I just want to take a moment to point out the 200 truck study and some of the fuzziness around NOx emissions. It's very important that decision makers at CARB and in other agencies understand that there was a recent webinar on the 200 truck study with CARB, South Coast Air Quality Management District, researchers from Houston Riverside that helped conduct the study, that showed that some of those high NOx emissions indicated by a few vehicles in the truck study were actually not true emissions. It was an anomaly in the testing. And last time I checked the fact sheet on the CARB website, that has not been clarified. So it's just important that decision makers understand the true emissions from the 200 truck study, which is still being finalized. I also want to say, when we send a strong signal to the wastewater sector to help with 1383 and divert food waste from landfills to digesters, we're also looking long-term towards hydrogen. We think that could be a very elegant solution. Hydrogen could generate power on site for us with zero emissions. It could power vehicles with zero emissions. But once again, it needs to be reliable because we can't compromise our essential service of conveying and treating wastewater 24/7 unless we have very reliable equipment. So these regulations, 1383, Advanced Clean Fleet, other regulations that we're dealing with in trying to advance the governor's mission of more recycled water, they all need to go hand in hand. Sarah Delorier mentioned One Water. We need to stop looking at our regulations in silos, whether it's just implementation of 1383 and Advanced Clean Fleet. Add into that our recycled water goals, other compliance goals, and really make sure we're crafting the best solution for the public to maintain affordability, to help clean the environment, and to help clean air. So we need to think hand in hand. I would strongly encourage an additional workshop with strong participation from Cal Recycle, local air districts such as South Coast Air Quality Management District, San Joaquin. This will be very important for making clear decisions on how to move forward to best benefit the public. Thank you so much for letting me comment, and thank you for having this workshop.
Thank you, Steve. And I think we are looking at the 200 truck study. It was a very robust study. It looked at 200 vehicles, looking at both chassis and PEMS equipment, portable equipment management. So we are looking at that and a correction to it, but that is a very robust study that looks at the emissions of these vehicles in use.
Okay, next in line to speak is Chuck White. Chuck, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak. Chuck White, we cannot hear you from our end.
All right, there I am. Sorry.
Okay, we can hear you.
Good, I'm glad. Yeah, this is Chuck White. I'm a senior advisor with Manette, Phelps and Phillips. We have many clients that are interested in the topics you've been talking about this morning. I'll try to be as brief as possible, but I'm really encouraged to see Vice Chair Berg and Member Krakow involved. And plus the lead-in presentation by the CARB staff really is encouraging, because a lot of people out here are worried that we would be having to transition to all electric vehicles in the not too distant future. And I'm getting the impression that you're hearing some of the concerns that many of us have been speaking about. One of the issues I wanted to mention is that many fleets today that have RNG rely on in-state and out-of-state RNG, and to a large fraction is out-of-state simply because that was the economic best way to develop RNG for use in California. There's going to have to be recognition that it's going to take time for these fleets to transition to in-state only sources of RNG, and I hope you take that into consideration. I hope you don't have any specific sunset dates for the use of RNG vehicles, and maintain the maximum degree of flexibility you can. Consistent with that, there are a whole lot of moving parts. I can tell you, whole thing. There's the scoping plan, the low carbon fuel standard, the ACF, SB 1383, pipeline methane, a whole lot of issues that are intertied, and every single one of them and others are going to be very important on how you move forward. I would encourage you to really allow the waste sources not to be just municipal solid waste and uses of for municipal solid waste, but also for agricultural, dairy, forest products. Wastewater treatment has been mentioned, both for the production of RNG and the use of RNG. But you also need to be recognizing there's a lot of fleets out there that just are going to be very difficult to transition to electricity, and you've got to be able to keep those options open. And I think you heard from a couple today with respect to agri-good and the forest products, and that's going to be important. Keep those options open for the foreseeable future. Don't forget RNG to hydrogen. That's a growing interest. Other people have mentioned. I'm not going to dwell on it, but there's growing importance there. One issue that hasn't been mentioned is fugitive methane emissions. Anytime you're producing, using, transporting methane, you're going to have some fugitive methane emissions. The Environmental Defense Fund has a target by 2025 is to keep all methane emissions, fugitive emissions from the production, transport, and use of methane, both fossil and renewable net methane, to less than 0.2% of the amount of methane that is being utilized. So that's something that I would urge you to consider, is that when you're allowing the use of methane, make sure you've got a system in place to ensure the minimum amount of fugitive methane emissions that are coming off of that use of that methane product. I'm almost done here, so I think I mentioned that. Yeah, I think I pretty much covered my concerns. I don't know if we'll be submitting comments. We've got a lot of different interests that we represent that are following this closely. I just encourage you to keep the maximum flexibility and allow biomethane. I guess the most important thing to leave you with is, depending on the source, biomethane is the lowest carbon fuel. If used in a low NOx engine, has an extremely low criteria for emissions. And so you're not going to have sources of electricity that have that kind of low carbon intensity, I think, for a long time here in California. Of course, you're making progress there, but I mean, the renewable natural gas, depending on the source of that renewable gas, can be in the negative carbon intensity. And that's got to be continued to be recognized to the maximum degree possible. Thank you very much.
All right. Next in line to speak is Yasmin Englides. Yasmin, I've unmuted your mic and you may speak.
Hi, good morning. My name is Yasmin Angelides, and I'm speaking on behalf of Earth Justice. I'm also part of the Coalition of 70 plus organizations from the environmental justice and labor coalition. And I also want to start by uplifting the comments from Mohammed Patel earlier. I will say that I'm concerned about this potential carve out for methane burning trucks in this rule that's otherwise a zero emission rule. Governor Newsom's executive order N7920, as we all know, sets a mandate to achieve 100% zero emission trucks on the road by 2045. And I'm concerned that including exemptions for waste and wastewater trucks is an unnecessary obstacle that's going to prevent us from achieving this goal and for cleaning the air for communities. As staff noted at the top of the presentation, methane, if used at all, should be used only in hard to decarbonize sectors. And transportation is not a hard to decarbonize sector. And, frankly, this includes waste and wastewater trucks. I understand there is a lot of interest on this call for methane, but hey, I want to remind staff and board members that frontline communities and a large portion of the environmental justice and environmental community stand strongly in opposition to burning methane, especially in a sector that is already electrifying today. Electric refuse trucks, they're not a dream. There are ZEV refuse trucks available today, including for Class 8 models, and then, side loader, front loader, rear loader as well, including the Mack LR electric, SCA Drive 180, and Lion 8 refuse truck. And then I also want to uplift a really important case study. So in fact, 2 years ago, Los Angeles, so, our state's largest city, committed to having a fully electrified refuse truck fleet by 2035. So in 13 years time, LA City Sanitation will have 100% electric refuse truck fleet consisting of 750 trucks. And, this is, LA's fleet is obviously very comprehensive. So there's a lot of models that would be covered by it. It's really no joke. And it does show that this is not one of those hard to decarbonize sectors. We're actually electrifying this now. And then at the same time, CARB's own TCO analysis shows that battery electric refuse trucks have a consistently lower TCO than methane burning trucks. So I really want to, make those points. And then finally for staff, I asked that staff not include a carve out for the waste and wastewater industry in this otherwise zero emission advanced clean fleet rule. In terms of stranded assets, SB1, already allows fleets to be protected so they don't have stranded assets for 13 to 18 years. To the extent that you do move forward with this exemption, which we strongly oppose, we would urge you to cabinet very tightly. So as Mohammed pointed out earlier, I also agree that the group 3 category I don't think it makes sense to include these trucks within that category under the ZEV milestone schedule. That is reserved for the hardest to decarbonize fleets. Sleeper cabs need to travel long distances, so we can understand that. Specialty vehicles have unique specifications, so we can understand that. Refuse trucks do not deserve to be under this group 3 category. They're already, we've already got these major commitments from huge fleets, and we have those models available today, and they'll just continue to have more in the next 13 years. So thank you so much to board members Krakow and Berg for leading this work. I know it's very important, and to staff as well. And I really hope that you'll take these comments into consideration and feel free to follow up with any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got about 25 minutes left. For the moderator, we keep having folks added to the queue after it was closed. At the time that we closed the queue, Priscilla Quiroz was the last speaker. We've got 3 or 4 more added. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all those folks because we do have to end at a reasonable time. So let's see where we go.
All right, next in line to speak is David Farron. David, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Good morning. David Farian, representing the California Waste and Recycling Association. We represent both private and public waste and recycling contractors, primarily working in the Southern California market. Just want to make a couple comments. There's been a lot of comments that have already been made that we support. Looking at slide 14, where you talk about this new timeline concept, I guess one question we would ask where you talk about the flexibility, continue to use biomethane. I guess we'd like to see maybe a little more specifics on exactly, kind of what that means. We appreciate those comments, and we'll look forward to, as we move forward, what that entails. We also would support, as mentioned, the eliminating the 50% for 2036. Again, allowing us to transition from what is today a carbon neutral fuel, renewable natural, to the fully electric. The other thing I want to just kind of call out, and you looking at the numbers provided on page 16, again, we talk about 16,500 vehicles, of which about 10,000 today are running on renewable natural gas, about 60%. Much of this credit goes to the early adoption of the waste industry. So we've been running fleets that are cleaner than most others in the state. And so, I think that's one of the reasons to kind of support, what you're proposing for us, in addition to obviously the compliance with 1383. And then I'll close with a couple very quick comments. One, many of our contracts will have to be amended to support a change from a renewable natural gas vehicle to an electric vehicle, because in a lot of cases, a lot of the procurement associated with 1383 is through our fuel purchases and productions, things that we have to do. But overall, we do appreciate the way this is moving, and we want to thank you for putting this together and allowing us to provide input.
Okay, next in line to speak is Heidi Sanborn. Heidi, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Former chair of the California Recycling Commission, right? Or chair, current chair? Hi, Heidi, we're not able to hear you.
Hear me now? Hello?
Yes, yes, we
Okay, sorry.
can.
All right, this is Heidi Sanborn. I'm the National Director of the National Stewardship Action Council. We advocate for an equitable and circular economy. And yes, I did chair the first seating of the Recycling Commission for 2 years until I resigned in July. And very proud of the work that we did. And that's part of the reason I'm here. I'm well aware, I've been doing this, work for 32 years here in California. And I strongly support the staff recommendation. I do not believe that's going to hurt the environment in any way. This industry has led, I think, the state in trying to do their best to convert our trucks as quickly as they could, and to RNG. And I can tell you, as Doug Cobalt mentioned down at the WasteCon conference, we've heard that the truck manufacturers are trying their best, but they're having a hard time being able to ramp up to meet the goals. I would also suggest that it's very important for all of us to think about, when we're going to promote new quote unquote green technology, we think about the entire life cycle of those technologies, whether it's, what do you do with end of life wind blades or these batteries? We still don't have an end of life plan for the batteries. We don't have recycling in this state for these batteries. And it's a really big deal when we're trying to keep our greenhouse gas footprint down, and we're trying to do this by creating jobs here in the state. So I urge everyone to think about how we can bring the recycling into this discussion as well. But I also am worried about the kickback of the public. If we continue to put unrealistic rules in place, for example, in our industry, we did 75% by 2020. We had in that bill, there was no funding and no plan on how to get there. And of course we failed. We're going backwards. We're actually under 50 now. We cannot continue to put rules in place that are unachievable. It doesn't make people have confidence in government. And I urge you to, and I'm really appreciative that the staff is moving in this direction. And I strongly support the proposal that staff put forward, and the comments of Bill McGovern, the haulers, and others. So thank you very much for letting me comment today.
Heidi, this is Gideon Krakow. Thank you for all your service and all the things that you do. I know you work very hard on end of life, product stewardship, whether it's mattresses or paints or needles and the other things that you've worked on. just very quickly, because we have to move on, there was a task force out of DTSC that worked on recycling analysis for lithium-ion batteries. A report came out from that with certain recommendations. Do you expect the legislature or the state to pick up on any of those recommendations in terms of end-of-life requirements, EPR, or other things for batteries?
I do. I expect they're going to have it this year, and I would strongly encourage CARB to get involved in these discussions, because even on the energy side, we hear from people, well, we don't want to put on solar panels. There's no recycling. There's no end-of-life plan. The same thing for all this green tech. We can't keep calling it green if we have no end-of-life management plan. And we really should be looking to create the jobs in California for those circular systems. So I would encourage everyone to get engaged. And yes, I do expect some legislation on that this year. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you again.
Yeah, and I just want to bring to everybody's attention, apparently we lost some of the hands that were raised on the Zoom meeting. So if those who had their hand raised and their hand got lowered, feel free to raise your hand again so we can get you back in the queue and get your comments or question answered. And I'll hope that everybody is on the honor system. Please only raise your hand if you haven't had a chance to speak yet. We've only got 15 minutes left.
Okay, next in line to speak is Priscilla Quiros. Priscilla, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Apologies. Oh, perfect. Priscilla Kudos with Scheider Entry Schmelzer and Lang here on behalf of Western Placer Waste Management Authority, a joint powers authority comprised of Placer County and cities of Lincoln, Rockland, and Roseville, operating a materials recovery facility. We just want to echo our appreciation for CARB staff and work on this, and the acknowledgement of need for flexibility for our waste fleets. As others have stated, the industry needs the ability to use RNG to support SB 1383 goals by providing a market for clean, renewable fuel and energy processed in state organic waste. As you're aware, many of on-site vehicles that operate at solid waste facilities are fueled with landfill-derived RNG, which is a true circular economy. We'll be reaching out to CARB staff to discuss our fleets in more details to give you the more background, but ones that come in mind are tractors that are used for transfer trucks and roll-off trucks. Both of these are used exclusively as part of facility operations and would pose a significant operational challenges if required to convert to electric style vehicles. The challenges include limited range, charging requirements, infrastructure, load capacity rating, and commercial availability. Again, appreciate the direction this is going and CARB staff's work on this. Thank you for the opportunity to comment in for this workshop.
All right, next in line to speak is Mary Alyssa Rancier. You may speak. Oh, Mary Alyssa, your mic is unmuted. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Hello, Vice Chair Berg and Krakow, members of the board and staff. Good morning. My name is Mary Alyssa Rancier, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Associated General Contractors of California, or AGC of California. We are a member-driven organization with over 900 members that provide commercial construction services. For the sake of time, I will keep my comments short. First, we would like to thank you for holding this workshop and providing this alternative. We ask the board and staff to consider including any contractors that move organic material, such as landscapers and demolition contractors, to be included in the language of this alternative. And that concludes my comment. Thank you.
Okay, we're hearing that comment. I think you've got to get with staff and figure out how something like that could be audited and be workable and fit within the framework that we're looking at. So look forward, Mary Ellen, to more contact with staff on that.
All right, next to speak is Olivia Siderman. Olivia, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Hi, thank you. This is Olivia Seidman with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We're a community-based environmental justice organization that works alongside communities in the San Joaquin and Eastern Coachella Valleys. First, I really want to echo the comments made by both Mohammed and Yasmin around the placement of these trucks in group 3 instead of group 2, and the fact that it is feasible for these trucks to transition to zero emission vehicles sooner. I do want to, because I do want to highlight especially some of the issues around biomethane. Leadership works alongside a lot of communities in the Central Valley where factory farm gas or dairy biogas is a huge concern. But a lot of our EJ partners who work in different parts of the states have raised very similar concerns for bioenergy as a whole. Biomethane oftentimes has really, production of biomethane has really negative impacts for communities. With factory farm gas and dairy digesters, we've seen the expansion of herd sizes, increase in enteric methane emissions or pre-digestion methane emissions that aren't captured. With the excess manure applied to fields, we've seen huge amounts of nitrates contamination in water. An industry funded study a few years ago found in all of the dairies they surveyed contamination of groundwater with nitrates. In addition to air pollution as well. So just want to highlight the impacts to communities for both biomethane and other types of biofuels, and how and ensure that California's policies should not be sacrificing the health and well-being of environmental justice communities. And that's why this transition to ZEV is so important, and really just echo the concerns around the use of biomethane as a fuel. Thank you.
Okay, we have 7 people left in the queue to speak and 10 minutes left on the clock. So I will unmute your mic, Dennis Alviani, and you may speak.
We have to go a little bit later to accommodate these 7 and finish up. I think we're prepared to do that today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate the chance. And thank you to the staff who've been working on this very diligently and the members there today. I represent the California Grain and Feed Association, as well as the Pacific Coast Rendering Association. Both of those entities have been hauling organics well before this was a concern, and they have very low carbon solutions for 1383 compliance. And so I'll start with the Pacific Coast Rendering Association, some of their members. They haul grease to digesters. They haul it also for renewable diesel and low carbon fuels compliance. And so as they pick up materials, again, whether it's from restaurants, whether it's from numerous facilities, they are one that serves that desire to get into the anaerobic digestion as well as low carbon fuel standards. So they could be easily complied upon. They should be added to this. The compliance would be easy because they're all registered with CDFA. Every single truck, every single grease hauling truck are registered. So with that, I think they should be included in this. And we look forward to working with you on, further enforcing that compliance element. With animal and livestock feed, animal feed is a huge consumer of organic material, organic waste material. And then according to US EPA, it is a preferred method to several of the other methods discussed here today, but it's feeding organics to livestock is preferred to things like anaerobic digestion or composting. It is a higher and better use. I heard some folks bring up higher and better use earlier today. And so that opportunity needs to be continued on 1383, and they collect this material and deliver it to a lower carbon consumption than any of the other ones that have been discussed today. So we want to make sure that that gets put in there, and again, registered. We can help work with you on compliance and registration. I think as things go forward, I mentioned low carbon fuel standard. Many of our members have been investing in that for many, many years, tens of millions of dollars. And so that's something that needs to be considered and continue to be recognized as we push towards further compliance. And then there is capacity. I'd like to say that both rendering biofuels, renewable diesel, and ourselves as feeding the livestock, We did a study, glad to share it with you. It shows that there's tens of millions of spare capacity available currently today in the system, both hauling as well as processing. So we'd like to further discuss that with you and make sure that it remains a viable solution. And then as we move forward, we would like to continue to work with staff and make sure that these market-based solutions remain viable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Albiani. I've heard a few times mentioned today this question of biodiesel, which means we're running diesel trucks. I don't believe that's part of the staff proposal here. Am I right about that? And can you explain staff's reasoning?
Yeah, that's correct. Again, that kind of goes back to the intro of the meeting. I mean, we're trying to balance a number of competing requirements to capture the waste methane and put it to a different use. And again, as we've discussed over time, we do expect that will be outside of transportation and fully transition to zero emission. It isn't just an approach that's just to somehow reward anything that's associated with achieving other objectives. And we recognize LCFS is there. It has its own market mechanisms, and a number of the things you're describing are in part, ultimately what our baseline is. I mean, as things change, engines get cleaner, the technology advances, and we need to continue to evolve. And so with this particular proposal, we're looking at providing a little additional time, not necessarily finding another basis to delay the cleanup of diesel vehicles per se.
All right, next in line to speak is Frank Harris. Frank, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. Board Member Krakow, Vice Chair Berg, thank you very much, as well as staff for holding this workshop. I have a single question. Just want to make sure I understand something. Earlier, there was a question about the role of any SB, any 1383 modifications with regard to public fleets. I believe I didn't properly introduce myself. I represent the California Municipal Utilities Association. So, of course, I'm very concerned about the role of the regulation with regard to public fleets. Now, I'm not sure if I understood the response correctly, so I want to make sure. I believe that the way I understood the response was that the only way that public fleets can have any access to these 1383 modifications is if they opt in to the high priority fleet rule. Was that accurate? Did I misunderstand that?
No, not exactly. The public fleets as originally proposed, or state and local government, would have a straight purchase requirement, and that was the only option they had. What we're proposing is to give them the same opportunity to meet the ZEV milestones as a percentage of their fleet as a compliance alternative that we've already provided or had originally proposed for the commercial fleets. And so what we're talking about today is these provisions we're talking about would be built in to somebody complying with that option if they meet the qualifications for it. And that means that some of their trucks would be on a later timeline just because they are interrelated here to the 1383 implementation part. So hopefully that helps. And so as a state or local government, that is a multifaceted agency like a city with multiple departments, what we're talking about in essence would be the wastewater department would have the option to opt in to this ZEV milestone approach if they found it to their advantage for any reason. And if a lot of their vehicles are already potentially RNG vehicles, then that would potentially give them a longer timeline in terms of the compliance option. And there's pros and cons with staying with the rules originally proposed versus what this provision is. And each fleet's going to be potentially different decision.
Thanks for that clarification, Tony. So for example, again, these are just concepts, but the wastewater department could opt in to the ZEV milestone, but the police department and the municipal, other parts of it would not necessarily have to.
Right. Yeah, the road repair, parks and rec, all those I would presume would not. select that option unless it was to their advantage. But if they don't have any vehicles that qualify for this provision, they wouldn't get extra time under that option.
All right, next in line to speak is Allison Torres. Allison, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Allison Torres with Eastern Municipal Water District, and I'm also the co-vice chair of the SCAP Air Committee. EMWD is a special district in Southern California, and we provide wastewater services. We have 4 wastewater reclamation facilities that are geographically separated through our 555 square mile service area. I'd just like to echo the big picture comments made by many CASA members today. I do appreciate the discussion and the comments made by Vice Chair Berg that the overall wastewater biogas problem is well understood. Thank you for that. But I do want to echo Steve Jepson's comments with SCAP with regard to the need for multiple pathways and for the additional biogas produced by food waste diversion projects that wastewater agencies, that we will be hesitant to invest in these projects that support SB 1383 without clear market signals in the regulation. The unclear signals, the short life cycle and investments, it adds a lot of uncertainty, and it's concerning as we seek sustainable solutions, innovative technologies, and try to make economically responsible decisions using public funds. So I do understand the respect the need to strike a balance, and I respect CARB's perspective on limiting the scope of the waste provision, but I do ask that CARB keep an open mind on the feasibility of how that concept supports the big picture issue with the long-term use of the biogas produced by food waste diversion. So please consider a concept that provides a pathway for RNG in transportation until a zero emission market is commercially viable. I understand the need for a pathway with the applicability criteria, but a pathway too narrow will provide, that will not provide demand for RNG omnibus compliant vehicles, will make project investments in SB 1383 projects difficult. And I do look forward to participating in future discussions, and we will help in any way and try to provide additional information to support the vehicle information that you are seeking on slide 14. I'm struggling a little bit to understand how the current concept will be applied to a special district that's a wastewater municipality that has more of a fleet management division, not necessarily subsidiary divisions that a city might have. So just something to keep in mind there. So I will end with that, and I thank you and look forward to participating in future discussions.
Okay, next in line to speak is Richard Coglia. Richard, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. You may speak.
Very good, thank you. That's Richard Caglia in Italian, Richard Caglia for speaking English.
Well,
I'm here, that's okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity and thank you for having this workshop. I represent an independent hauler here in the Central Valley, Fresno, California. We are early adopters. We've been around since 1939. And as early adopters of converting diesel trucks to CNG, renewable natural gas, we do front load, side load, roll off, and support vehicles as well. We'd like to consider ourselves SB 1383 problem solvers. I do concur with a lot of the comments made by the majority of your speakers today. Please give us the credit and the time for the millions of dollars we've already spent. I actually think that RNG should be forever. I think 2036 is a reasonable start date and 2050 plus is a good end date. And if I could throw one curveball back to the Air Board, thank you, Vice Chair Berg, for your comments regarding mitigating ideas and concerns in the Central Valley here with our air quality and the reduction of NOx. You know, there's many of us that run large transfer trucks either to a diversion facility or a landfill. And could you imagine if we could somehow strike a deal with the state and all of the players that would be involved in the long conversation that would likely take place, if we could just put one more ton in our transfer trucks going to those facilities or a landfill, and going from gross vehicle weight of 80,000 pounds to 82,000 pounds, one more ton off the road, a heck of a lot less truck trips, a heck of a lot less vehicles mile traveled, and that would be a direct impact on your NOx. Lastly, I will say, an old saying is no ban without a plan. I would say here, with all things considered and the impact that this was all going to have on our futures, is no ban without a better plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next in line to speak, we have two more people that had their hands up before we called end of commenters. And Shane, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name, but you are next in line to speak. I've unmuted your mic.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hello, my name is Shane Petkowitz, calling from Energia. Aware of time, so didn't want to speak too lengthy, but really appreciate the leadership that staff and the board members are showing through this event today. Just a bit of background: Energia develops organics processing facilities that divert organics from landfill, and then anaerobic digestion facilities that beneficially reuse them into carbon negative RNG and power, as well as soil amendments. We have a number of facilities throughout the state of California, two of which are injecting carbon negative RNG into the grid right now. One is the SoCal gas grid and Southwest gas grid. And fundamentally, I think we're really excited about one of the key factors that is going to ensure success of SB 1383 is having a home for RNG. RNG generated from landfill organics, and we appreciate staff and board's efforts on finding ways, particularly for the waste and solid waste industries, to continue using this carbon negative renewable natural gas that encourages a circular economy and allows for decarbonization of the transportation sector. So I'll be brief. Appreciate the time, and we'll follow up with more comments.
Thank you. I have two more folks with their hands up, and I'm going to call on Laurel Moorhead. You may speak. Laurel, okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Laurel Moorhead, and I represent Transfer Flow Incorporated. Transfer Flow has been in business in Northern California for 40 years, manufacturing high-quality liquid fuel systems. And most of the comments I wanted to make have already been made today, so I will save everybody's time and not repeat that. But the one thing that I didn't hear anyone that I get frustrated with this a lot because I hear it, but people say all internal combustion engines create NOx. And prior to working for Transfer Flow, I've been a state of California certified advanced level emissions specialist, automotive emissions specialist since 2008. And so I wanted to throw some numbers in there so that people could understand how low NOx these vehicles are. So I went ahead and I pulled up the EO for a brand new 11.9 liter compressed natural gas powered vehicle created by Cummins, and it blew on the supplemental emissions testing 0.000 grams per brake horsepower hour of NOx. And the federal test procedure blew 0.01. So to put that into perspective, I also pulled up a diesel EO for an engine that's half that size, because 12 liters is a huge motor. This is a Class 8 motor. So a diesel motor half that size blows over 5 times as much NOx as the compressed natural gas vehicle. And then from there, I looked up the new standards for the advanced clean fleets, the advanced clean cars 2. The advanced clean cars 2, the new standard in 2028 is 0.03. And that's on a little tiny hybrid passenger car. So we're talking this huge 12-liter compressed natural gas vehicle is blowing a third of the NOx of what you are going to allow on a little tiny passenger car. And that's the technology that's available now. So just, to throw some numbers out there so people understand how low NOx these are. That was my only comment I wanted to add. Thank you very much for your time. And can you please also list a link where we can send written public comments on this? Thank you very much.
All right, so two folks raised their hands after we called the end of commenters. Would you like to hear their comments, or should we? I would have to call it after these last two. Anyone want to tell me their preference?
Let's go ahead and take
Okay.
the last two
right.
and
David Eisen and Stacy Heaton, you're the last two commenters for today's workshop. David, I'm going to unmute your mic. You may speak.
Hi, staff. Thank you for having me. I did raise my hand, but it did fall off, so I apologize about that. I'm with Imperial Western Products and Denali Water Solutions, a very diverse green company that has been handling animal feed across the United States and wastewater treatment plant water and biosolids across the state. Very proud of what we've done here. We're part of SB 1383. We do follow the EPA food recovery hierarchy to the highest and best use. We just want to make sure that we're part of the diverse solution to a diverse problem, and we look forward to having additional conversations. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. And the last speaker for today is Stacy Heaton. Stacy, I've unmuted your mic. You may speak.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I appreciate you hearing my comments. I apologize for not raising my hand sooner. I thought I had. Stacy Heaton with the Rural County Representatives of California, representing 40 rural counties statewide, and also the Environmental Services Joint Powers Authority, representing 26 rural county waste jurisdictions. We appreciate the staff recommendation being discussed today for a number of reasons, but most notably, small rural jurisdictions are already struggling to implement the complex provisions of SB 1383, particularly with the hefty requirements for organics procurement and other things. RCRC is also deeply engaged with PG&E on behalf of the North State to try and help expand vehicle charging infrastructure and to help with issues with grid reliability. But unfortunately, and frankly, we foresee those issues continuing for many years to come. We feel like the best programs for public health and for the environment are implementable programs. And we feel the staff's proposal today is a much more implementable version than what was proposed in the final draft. And we appreciate the staff and appreciate them working with public fleets and with the industry. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our Zoom participant panelists or call-ins. So I'll pass it off to.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Stacy. Good to hear from you. Staff, before we sort of wrap up and with some board member thoughts, is there any additional comments or information that you'd like to try to get at today, or make sure that people know how to find you?
Yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about process. So we are in a tight time frame. We're having a number of workshops over the next month or two. Going to continue having stakeholder meetings, and we are trying to return to the board in the spring time frame. So there's a lot to talk about. We heard about a number of questions, things we need more information on. Some highlights: access to pipelines, the types of vehicles to include, numbers of vehicles, how municipalities can divide their vehicles. So we're going to work with you on all this. We are happy to have meetings, discuss via email. We can try to have meetings in person, but we really are looking for information. And January would be ideal. Maybe February. Timeline is just very no.
It's not.
Nope.
December would be ideal. If it slips into January, that's okay.
Okay. No. So that's what we have on process. We will work with you, but we are on a tight time frame. Now I'll pass it back to our board members.
So I'll just chime in for a second before the vice chair closes the meeting, but want to thank everyone participating. I want to thank Chair Randolph, Executive Officer Cliff, and Craig and Sid and Tony and the whole team here for doing this. I'm just really proud that the agency has done this. I think it's really necessary. And again, I'm hopeful that these kind of discussions and quite confident that these kind of discussions are going to continue as we see how this industry deals with SB 1440. How does it deal with hydrogen? How does it deal with the 1383 requirements over time, and how that interacts with CARB's planning as well as CARB's transportation rules? I thought it was a good workshop today. I still think that staff is going to need to another pun here, digest the information and assimilate it into a workable proposal. We did try to focus on these questions of what kind of equipment. So we heard today about transfer trucks, pump trucks, bin delivery trucks, roll-off trucks, some of which are going to be in category three anyway. but some aren't. And I think that some of those trucks do properly belong within the ecosystem that we're talking about. We've talked about what kind of fleets, the municipal fleets, the private fleets. We also talked a little bit today about arborists, landscapers, demo contractors. I don't know how they fit into this ecosystem, how we can properly cabin that and audit and ensure compliance, but I did hear about a couple other fleets that we may want to consider that, again, may be properly within this 1383 ecosystem. The last thing also, is on the facilities. We heard about that today. We've got wastewater. We have these digesters. I don't know to what extent the composting, biochar, or these forest and ag waste facilities, also fit in. But to me, I think we've got to answer some of these questions. I urge folks that care about these particular sectors to get the information to staff, and staff is going to try to figure out how all of this fits in within our conceptual framework, and most importantly, how we can, in the end, land on a rule that is workable and reasonable, and which staff can enforce and ensure compliance in an adequate way. So that's where I want to head with this. I think we've talked a little bit about the timeline, and just very impressed and appreciative of this, appreciative that we had our industrial services folks listening in, folks from PUC and Cal Recycle listening in, and I'm hopeful that these discussions will continue well into the future.
And thank you so much, Gideon, for all of your very hard work on this. I really, really appreciate that. I think I really want to focus my closing comments on 2050. When we look at what is possible, we can't think out to really 2050. There's no regulation, there's no crystal ball. We do not know exactly what's going to happen in 2050. I had an opportunity to attend a TED Talk, and one of the speakers was talking about hope. And I loved their quote, which was, "Hope is not the denial of reality. It is the belief that we can do better than reality in the future." And that's really what we're working for here. And as business leaders, of which I've spent my career being one, we can look at the immediate. We know what the end goal is, but honestly, we got to figure out what we're going to do the next 5 years, because 2030 is going to be the benchmark. Wherever we are in 2030 will determine where we're going to be in 2040 and 2050. So this regulation is going to be critical, and CARB staff and CARB board are going to revisit this many times between now and 2050. And so let's not lose sight of really, we've got to find out what is expected. There's no question, devils are in the details. We don't know the details for 2040 and 2050. But what we do know is, what do we need to do between 2024 and 2030 to be on that trajectory to make this a success? And so we've clearly heard communities, they are the ones that do suffer the disproportional impacts of cumulative pollution. We know that, and we need to be mindful, and they've been waiting a long time. We understand that. That is the needle we're truly trying to thread. We also understand there has to be a home for RNG. This is not going to go away. This is created by part of our daily living, part of our existence. We need to figure that out. I think it's an ideal opportunity, once the regulation is passed, for a multi agency and stakeholder work group that truly looks at the key issues, not the issues of, is this truck available? Am I having problems with infrastructure? That's going to happen in another venue. really, really what the key issue that I have here, where's the home for RNG? And how are we going to get there? Because if we know that, or at least there's a path for that, then you can figure out the rest of the stuff. It won't be easy. There'll be hiccups along the way. There might be big mountains we have to figure out. But the fact is how are we collectively looking at this? And so maybe that's something as this all evolves, we can look at as some interest from the stakeholders, from multiple agencies to be able to collaborate. It wouldn't be a multi-meetings per year. It really would be an opportunity for some of your associations all to get together and with that specific topic. Don't let the other noise come in, because if we don't figure that out, then the other noise does take precedent. And so I've really enjoyed being here. Great to see people in person. Thank you for everybody being online. And we'll look forward to you continue to interact with staff as you know your board members are. And we'll look forward to a favorable outcome for both our communities and for our very important stakeholders that handle this waste stream. So thank you so much.
All right, thanks everyone. And just a reminder, we do have another meeting at 1 o'clock in the same room. So if we could, if we could quickly transition out, that would be great.